Hi, everyone. If everyone could settle in, we're going to start in exactly 1 minute. Thanks. I'm pretty bossy, huh?
I didn't even have to say Bob.
Okay, we're ready to rumble. Hi. Okay, there we go. I just called Steve Exaro's Kip Diggs. So that's how I started the conference. Anyway, good afternoon. My name is Suzanne Conley. I'm the chair of Save Greater Dowses Beach. We put this wonderful program together, and I was going to welcome everyone, but there's someone much better to do that. So I'd like to introduce the voice of reason, the friend of Cape Codders and Islanders everywhere, the dean of talk radio, Captain Ed Lambert.
The dean of talk radio, huh? That's what Polito calls me. I was going to say my name is Nick Krakoff after that whole thing, but I decided not to. You know, thanks everybody very much, and it's an honor to be here. And it's so good to see so many of our lawmakers, our counselors, our advocates, the truth seekers, and the critics too. And to what's going on and to what Suzanne and everyone has been able to put together close to the win, the summit. A lot to cover today, and thanks to all the groups and all the women and men involved with this that have brought so hard to bring it all together. Green Oceans, AKC Wales, New England Fishermen's Stewardship, Falmouth Heights and Mara Vista, Barnstable Speaks, Concerned Physicians, Protect Southbridge Beach of Virginia, and most of all, to all of those involved with Save Greater Dowsett Beach. It's been terrific. There's so many more out there too, but thanks to all of you. And again this morning, unfortunately, in the electronic version of our local newspaper, they ran again the hit piece by Nick Krakoff from the Conservation Law Foundation. He questions everybody here having direct or indirect ties to oil, to gas, to coal. And he said, none of us care about the science or the truth. We're just concerned with our bank accounts. Nick ends his unbiased column by saying they weren't honest then, they aren't honest now, referencing oil, gas, and coal. My only thing for everybody here and for Nick and for the local daily, maybe they should look in the mirror of the wind groups and say again, they weren't honest then, they're not honest now. Let's begin today's event by trying to uncover the truth. Once again, thanks all for coming.
First thing I want to do is acknowledge my friends and my colleagues on Save Greater Dowsett Beach, Stacy Gunther, and I founded it a year and a half ago. We were sitting on the beach when we founded it. Our first rule was we're nonpartisan. We've remained that way this whole time. Also Hector Gunther, Adam Myrick, Pete Hansen, Dr. Gary Peters, Ann Peters, Bob Schulte, Paul Sylvester, Robert Slater, and our fellow traveling friend, Brian Coble. SGDB is a 501c4 tax-exempt unincorporated association. Our funds, Mr. Krakoff, have been derived solely from the generous donations of Barnstable residents, and we sincerely thank those of you who helped us defray the cost of today's event. This conference has been organized for one purpose, and that is to give voice to citizens groups that oppose all or some aspects of ocean wind farm development. In fact, we have pitched a large tent here. We do not think alike about ocean wind farms, but we share this. We have been dismissed, ridiculed, gaslighted by ocean wind developers and the federal and state regulatory agencies and officials that, in my opinion, are giving them a much, much too easy pass. Personally, I am so tired of hearing how comments, presentations, and formal filings made by intelligent, well-educated people in our community are constantly derided, in our case by Avangrid, as misinformation, and hearing that our well-founded concerns, for example, for the whales, are non-issues. I heard that at a conference in Boston a few weeks ago. I believe it's safe to say that all of us here today support a sound, well thought out transition to renewable energy that takes into account the fragility of our environment. Perhaps a few of you in the room today have been outspoken or have been in support of the projects proposed for the town of Barnstable. That is your right. We're still the United States of America. I respect that. And we ask for the same courtesy today, and we hope you hear us with open minds. These are the oceans we work on and enjoy that sustain us and enrich us with the beauty and wonder of an incredible diversity of life. These are the beaches we love, the villages, towns, and neighborhoods where we live and work. These are the woodlands around us and the water that allows us to live here. We have a right and a duty to question and even resist in order to protect it all. Sailors know that sailing close to the wind, that is near or directly into it, is a risky business. Wind on both sides of your sail and you're luffing, you're in irons, dead in the water. It's an apt metaphor for why we are here today. There are two sides to consider in the rush to build massive ocean wind farms along our coastlines, the offshore and the onshore environments. That is how today's conference is organized, as indicated in the afternoon's program. We will start with concerns for the ocean and the life within, and move onshore to talk about cables, duct banks, and substations. With that, please allow me to introduce our featured speaker, Dr. Lisa Kwadraki Knight, the co-founder and president of Green Oceans. an organization dedicated to combating climate change without sacrificing biodiversity or the health of the ocean. Dr. Knight employs her scientific expertise to develop evidence-based strategies to address the current tension between climate advocacy and marine conservation. Please welcome Dr. Knight.
Sorry, this is going to take me a minute to set up. Yeah, stuff there. Got this for my eyes.
Don't worry about that. Get your presentation up.
Okay. Just want to make sure people can hear me. Well, can you hear me now? Hello? That's good? Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for Suzanne for organizing and inviting me. Thank you everyone else who was part of the organization of this conference and for everyone being here. I'm actually very honored to be here talking to you. For someone who has felt silenced in this debate for a long time, it is really nice to have an audience. So I also want to thank, before I begin, the members of Green Oceans. We have a board of trustees that have been unbelievably productive in the last year, an entire executive committee that has been tireless. But most of all, I want to thank my co-founder, Bill Thompson, who's here in the room. I want to thank him for his courage, his leadership, and his wisdom. I also want to emphasize, despite the rumors, especially in the Cape Cod Times recently, that we are not funded by the fossil fuel companies, nor do we have any connections with the Koch brothers. We are a completely nonpartisan grassroots organization. We share a concern for our environment and for the climate, and we particularly share a love for the ocean. So our mission, Green Ocean's mission, is to protect the ocean and biodiversity because that ensures our own survival. A healthy ocean is one of our best defenses against climate change. Why? Well, the ocean, as many of you know, produces more oxygen for our planet than all of the rainforests in the world. It absorbs carbon dioxide and the excess heat we produce. Like the circulatory system in the body, the ocean is absolutely vital to the health of the planet. So, what are we doing by industrializing the ocean? Most of you might know, but there are plans off our shores to put over 1,000 wind turbines, each of them over 870 feet tall, only 12.9 miles from the coast. And these are driven by state mandates, not by science. So this is a map where these 1,000 turbines are going to go. It consists of 9 projects. These 9 projects will cover over 1,400 square miles of pristine ocean. That's more than the state of Rhode Island itself. These are going to be the largest turbines ever built. the greatest number in one location anywhere on Earth, and the largest marine construction project in the history of the world. Even China hasn't tried to do something like this. So those of you who might actually be for offshore wind might be thinking, well, more is actually better and bigger is better. This means that this country has finally gotten serious about climate change and we're finally doing something about it. But as the Washington Post actually published 7 years ago, bigger is not always better. The more renewables you have, the bigger the problem can be. And that problem is that they rely on natural gas. They rely on fossil fuels. So how big is big? Well, these are very big. 870 feet compared to the lighthouse off of the Seconic Point. The lighthouse is 70 feet tall. This is how it looks from shore, and this is how it looks compared to one of the typical turbines that are going to be off our shores. They're bigger than any building in all of Boston. They are going to be enormous. And why is big? Why does it matter? Well, it turns out that bigger turbines use bigger foundations. Those foundations have to be jackhammered, basically, or pile driven 300 feet into the ocean bed, into the seafloor, in order to stand up. Bigger also means that they're going to be more vulnerable to hurricanes, to strong winds, and they're going to be more likely to fail. So what else goes with big? Big oil. Well, big oil is big wind. And one of the things that Nicholas Krakow, or whatever his name is actually, did not know is that big oil is driving this. So the Danish oil and natural gas company is now Ørsted. They've changed their name, but they haven't changed their spots. Statoil, the Norwegian oil company, is now Equinor. British Petroleum just bought the Beacon Hill lease, and Avangrid is the big Spanish energy giant. And finally, we have Shell Oil. So can we trust big oil now that they want to be big wind? Well, I would say, as a physician, they are not actually adhering to the Hippocratic Oath. We have a sick planet, and they are not adhering to the do no harm oath. They know they're going to be doing harm. What kind of harm and to what extent? Oddly enough, some people, even people who agree that we need offshore wind, would say that there are places in the ocean where it might not be appropriate. Well, one of those places is a place called Cox's Ledge. So this is a depth map of the ocean. And you can see from the turquoise that though there's an area that's a little bit lighter and a little more shallow. This area happens to be a foraging ground for 5 endangered whale species and one of the last remaining spawning grounds for southern New England cod. And yet, despite that, BOEM and our US government went ahead and approved the 2 projects that are going to cover the entire area of Cox's Ledge. So that circled area is the same area, and you can see it's now covered with where turbines are going to be placed and inter-array cables are going to be connecting. Why does this matter? Well, biodiversity does matter in terms of our health. The World Health Organization said that biodiversity is more important for human survival than climate change. NOAA was worried. They wrote 2 separate letters to BOEM saying these projects are going to pose population level risks to southern New England cod. And yet, BOEM went ahead and approved those projects anyway. And not only that, they approved it despite the fact that the company admitted that there is going to have an overall cumulative a major adverse impact of all commercial fishing and recreational fishing. So you might ask, why are the companies actually admitting these kinds of things? Well, it turns out that the impact statements are kind of like a confessional report. If the companies confess to all of these adverse impacts, then when the government goes ahead and approves the project, it's not the company's fault. We told you it might have population level impacts on cod, but you approved it anyway. So it's not our fault and we can't be sued. Well, turns out there are some problems with marine mammals as well. Are they worried about all the marine mammals that like to forage during the winter on Cox's Ledge? Are they worried about all the marine mammals that migrate through all of the Atlantic continental shelf areas where all of the wind projects are planned from North Carolina up to Maine? Well, they probably are, and they probably should be, because 78 large whales have died in the past year during offshore wind construction and site survey work. Well, a lot of people would say, including the government and also the Conservation Law Fund, that there is absolutely no connection or any reason to be worried about these things. Even when a whale dies right in the middle of the South Fork Wind construction site, we can tell this because of the number on the foundation. So this is a pile-driven foundation, and this is a dead whale right in front of it. It's a humpback whale. Well, when the Conservation Law Fund actually comes out and says that there's absolutely no connection, and NOAA comes out and says there's no connection, you have to wonder why. In the Conservation Law Fund's instance, I actually give them a pass. Well, not complete pass, but I actually respect their work. I think they are smart people. I just don't think they've done their homework. They have not looked to see that on the NOAA site, you can download the incidental harassment authorization form. It turns out it's illegal to actually harm or harass whales, any marine mammal, unless you ask permission first. If you ask permission, you can actually harm and even kill a whale. Well, it turns out that the South Fork Wind Company, or actually Ørsted, asked permission. They not only asked permission, but they specifically asked permission to harm humpback whales, the very type of whale that was dead in the South Fork area. Not only did they ask for the humpback whales, but they asked for more humpback whales than any other kind of whale. So they must have known that this particular whale was actually vulnerable. Level A harassment is the type of harassment that leads to permanent injury and even death. So why are they trying to tell us that there may not be any connection between the whale death and the construction site? The company asked for permission and the government gave them permission. Why would they ask and why would they be given permission if there was absolutely no connection between the two things? Well, I think the Conservation Law Fund had to close its eyes to this, and I'm not sure why. I think probably because they really truly believe that offshore wind is the answer to our climate problem, and therefore they don't want anybody like you or me to thwart them in any way. Well, they're going to have to close their eyes to a lot more, because just for the projects off the coast of Rhode Island and Massachusetts, they've given permission for over 13,000 whale harassments, 250,000 dolphin and porpoises, and 73,000 seals. That's a lot of marine mammal permissions to be asking for, and it's a lot to be giving too. So what about the birds? Well, it turns out that you don't have to ask for the same kind of permissions for birds, so we don't know exactly, but we do know that raptors and eagles are particularly vulnerable to these kinds of things because they're never expecting the turbine blades to be coming from above. We also know that there are at least 4 endangered species in Massachusetts and Rhode Island that are going to be flying through these areas. One in particular is a beloved bird called the piping plover. And here is a map of the actual migratory pathway. Well, some people say that birds, so there's a little, collateral damage here. Well, how do you feel about the fact that maybe that collateral damage is also for humans? So it turns out that offshore turbines disrupt radar. That means that the Coast Guard has admitted that they will have to abort search and rescue during bad weather. Well, how often do you have a situation where you need to be rescuing someone in good weather? It's usually bad weather. And so they have admitted that these turbine farms, 1,400 square miles of them, are going to be prohibited from doing search and rescue during bad weather in those farms. That means there's going to be an unavoidable or a loss of life that would otherwise have been avoidable. And that is in their statement when they talk about the offshore wind turbines. So that's a lot of bad news. Well, what else could the offshore developers be hiding from us? Well, it turns out quite a bit. So this is a picture of two different simulations. It turns out this is from the Ørsted Revolution Wind Farm. They have two separate sets. One they submit to the government and the other they give to the public. And this is a blow up of the actual simulation. And I've blown it up not to show how bad the view is, but just to demonstrate that the top one, which is the private one that they submitted to the government, you can actually see turbines on the horizon. The public one that they actually let the public view, you can see no turbines. So no wonder people think, oh, what are people upset about? You're not going to be able to see them. Well, you will be able to see them from at least 40 miles away. What else has the company and the government actually kept from us? Well, they've kept the emergency response plan to oil spills. It turns out there's a lot of diesel oil, lubricants, and other things in these turbines. They've kept the safety management confidential. They've kept the air emissions calculations and methodology confidential, the impact to historical resources, and finally, the economic effects of these wind farms. So this is in public property. The ocean, it does belong to the public, and US citizens are paying 70% of the construction costs. These companies, now that you know are fossil fuel companies, you know they're for-profit companies. So we're paying all this for for-profit companies, and they're not letting us see what the economic impacts are to our own states. But I have more bad news. One is the jet plowing for the cables. So it turns out to trench the cables, you have to liquefy the ocean bed 4 to 6 feet down to lay the cables. There are hundreds of miles of cables out there. This is going to create sediment plumes that not only will change spawning grounds and breeding grounds, it will suffocate the fish around them, and it will resuspend all of the toxic chemicals that have been in these areas for generations, if not centuries. So, and the government has never asked these companies to test in their any core samples along these routes for PFOAs, the forever chemicals, nor have they asked them to test for heavy metals, for BPAs, pesticides, any of the things that we might not want to be resuspended in the ocean, because once they're resuspended in the ocean, they get absorbed into the food chain and they are bioaccumulated and bioconcentrated in the fish that we love to eat. So if they can't actually liquefy the ocean bed and bury them with the jet plows, they use mattresses to cover up the cables. These mattresses will also change the habitat. But what's more worrisome to me is the fact that, this is a slightly more close up, is the fact that these are crisscrossed over 1,400 miles. These cables, especially the interarray cables, heat up. They emit heat. So 2 feet away will be increased by 36 degrees. That's a lot. Down in Florida, a 1 to 2 degree change in temperature bleached out 90% of the coral. We don't have coral reefs, but we have a lot of important things in our ocean, including fish eggs, plankton, small crustaceans, and a 36-degree increase might actually change some things. The export cables don't give off as much heat, but they give off something called electromagnetic fields, EMFs. So EMFs are very important for primitive species, especially things like squid, lobster, turtles. They use EMFs to migrate, and they also use EMFs to find food, avoid prey, and even to mate. So a study up in Scotland tried to see if it changed development in lobster in particular, and found that it actually caused eye malformations and tail malformations. And those tail malformations didn't allow the small lobster to swim properly. And so the scientists who ran this study predicted that these EMFs at the level of an export cable will have population level impacts on lobster. And we know now that population level is just another sort of euphemism for extinction. Then we have the substations, and maybe somebody else is talking about the substations, but one of the things that I wanted to mention about the substations is that we're going to have about 10 to 15 of them out there, maybe more. Each one sucks in 8 to 10 million gallons of ocean water a day, heats it up to 90 degrees, puts chlorine bleach in it, and then spews it back out. Everything that gets sucked in gets killed. Every plankton, every larva, every small little crustacean gets killed in this process. That's a lot of ocean water to be heating up and killing every single day. So how are these things actually getting accepted by the communities? One, I think that, people who already believe that this is going to be good for the climate are not bothering to read those environmental impact statements. The other thing is that there is government-sanctioned bribery. Part of the lease process actually included asking the developers to put in a certain amount of money that they're going to actually give to communities to sort of soften or mitigate the impacts. So these community bribes have helped people accept the bad impact. But I don't know what $170 million is going to do for my grandchildren when there's no fish left in New England. I mean, I know that's an exaggeration, but $170 million is a lot of money. It also shows that these are for-profit companies. They're not giving away $170 million unless it still makes financial sense. So what's happening that it still makes financial sense even though they're giving $170 million away? Well, we might say, okay, I can accept all these negative things if I knew it was actually going to help the planet. But it turns out that offshore wind is not so clean. If you just take into account the footprint of the manufacturing and the installation, it's pretty devastating. We have steel and cement, all made in China, shipped over in diesel ships to Europe where it's manufactured, and then shipped to the US where we have to install it. We have all of the rare earth metals, the cobalt and the copper, which is mined, a lot of it is mined in Africa and in China under not so great conditions. We know these countries have human rights abuses, and then it all has to be shipped to Europe and then to the United States. So the footprint alone is not very carbon friendly. But then you add on top of the fact that it is an intermittent source of energy or electricity. And every sailor knows that sometimes the wind doesn't blow. When the wind doesn't blow, we still want to be able to have our laptops working. And so that is why the Washington Post actually had the article about the fact that the more you have on the grid, the worse it is, because the more you have to have as your backup source. And it's not really a backup source. You have to have 100% of the electricity has to be able to be immediately added to the grid when the wind stops. When the wind stops, for revolution wind, it's also going to be stopping for beacon wind. So it's not like one of the projects is going to be able to compensate for the other one. We have developed really efficient fossil fuel turbine generators. So, and I'm not advocating for these, but natural gas turbine generators, they're called cogen plants. They can generally operate at about a 70% efficiency. But when you actually have them on standby and they have to go from a low level to a high level, cycling up and down, they go down to about a 35% efficiency, even less than that too sometimes. So you're going to be using more natural gas for less electricity. The other thing is most of the electricity that is generated by wind farms happens at night in the wintertime. Well, we use most of our electricity in the summer during the day, and we don't have batteries. We don't have the battery capability to store that electricity. And the interesting thing about batteries is we have not developed the technology that would allow us to store this and we won't, so we will not have the battery power in our lifetime, if even for the next century. So I might be saying something very different about offshore wind if we had the battery backups. I don't really think so, but I might be. But we don't have the backup battery. So why are we doing this now instead of investing in the technology that would allow us to actually use the offshore wind? We could be investing in the battery technology. That's why the more we put on the grid, the worse the problem is going to be. And that is borne out in real life studies. Why are carbon emissions up despite the fact that we have so many renewables? Well, it's not really that much of a mystery. It's because of this intermittency. And the government knows that. They even say that they anticipate that the proposed action, and this is in the Revolution Wind environmental impact statement, will have no measurable influence on climate change. The company itself, in their fact sheet, they never mention that it's going to have any effect on carbon dioxide. They never mention that it's going to wean us off fossil fuels. They never mention that it's going to help climate change. The only thing they mention is that it's going to help us meet our state mandates. Well, you might think, okay, well, that's just one project. But even collectively, the government admits that there's going to be no collective impact on global warming. So if we're not getting a benefit from global warming, we have these known harms, maybe it's going to help the economy. Maybe that's why we're doing it. Well, the government also admits that offshore wind is the most expensive form of electricity out there, more expensive than nuclear. And who gets hurt when electricity rates not just double, but maybe quadruple? It's going to be the people who can afford it the least. Will it help the economy overall? Well, we know when electricity rates go up, usually manufacturing leaves. So that means that manufacturing is going to leave New England, maybe go to the south, but also maybe go to China. China is building a new coal-fired power plant once a week. By the end of this year, they're going to have built more coal-powered plants in 1 year than the United States has in the entire country. So the government also says that it's going to have a major adverse impact on employment. Some jobs will benefit, true, but overall, it's going to be a major negative adverse impact, and it's going to have a major adverse impact on the economy overall. And I haven't even mentioned decommissioning. So that's a whole nother subject. And decommissioning is a problem because the government has decided in its wisdom to not force or not make the companies who are developing these put aside adequate bonds to pay for decommissioning. We know that these companies, Shell Oil, all of these oil companies, they're not hanging on to these projects. They're building them, they're getting the tax breaks, then they're turning them into limited liability companies. That means they have no financial or legal liability once these things are in the ground and are starting to make electricity. That means a hurricane could come by in a year and destroy it, and we would have no money to pay for these. What's more is that what we have learned from the project in Oklahoma that was decommissioned is decommissioning costs are actually higher than installation costs. sometimes significantly. But even if that's not true, the installation costs are much higher than we originally expected. So South Fork Wind, it turns out that each turbine cost $150 million. If we have 1,000 turbines out there, that's $150 billion that we're spending on something that we don't even know is going to help and probably will do far more harm than good. And the cost is astronomical, not only to build, but to get rid of. And if you think this technology isn't really up to snuff right now, it's only going to last 20 years. And at that point, it's very much going to be obsolete. So who's going to pay $150 billion to get rid of this? I don't think the ratepayers are going to want to. So I have to say that, again, I speak to this as a doctor. We need to know the benefits as well as the harms. When we had the COVID pandemic, the entire global economy was paralyzed, and yet the FDA required that vaccine companies actually do placebo-controlled trials to prove that their product made a benefit, helped prevent COVID. They also made them identify all the side effects. Why are we giving these companies such a pass? Why is the government just letting this happen? And I would argue that the COVID pandemic was just as much of a crisis as this climate crisis. And I would say that during the time of a crisis, and I think everybody who's a sailor or who's done anything that's kind of stressful, it's during a crisis you want to actually follow the rules. That's not when you want to start cutting corners. So we need to adopt solutions that will work, not just ones that we want to work. I think everybody wants offshore wind to work, but we have no evidence that it will. And the other thing I would like to say is we cannot afford to make a mistake now. If we actually do believe that we have a narrow window to try to solve the climate crisis, we do not need to be doing something with such a heavy carbon footprint now, and one that we don't have any assurance is going to actually work. So Green Oceans has taken the government to task for this, and we filed a lawsuit last week asking the government to follow its own rules. If this is a time of crisis, we need them to do this right. And we want to leave you with the idea that if we join together, we actually can try to get our voices heard. I'm not sure exactly why it's been so hard to have people listen to us, but I think the more we work together, the more people will have to start to listen. And Margaret Mead has a famous quote that I love, which is, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." And this is our slogan, "Keep it wild." And if anyone would like a yard sign, we can deliver them to you. Thank you.
What a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much, Dr. Knight. Keep it wild. Love it. That gave me goosebumps, especially the thing about a small group of people, because my merry little band of opposition leaders, we've been having a good time for a year and a half, and it's just so gratifying to see so many people here. It's just tremendous. So thank you all for being here. I want to introduce a couple of fellows from Maine who didn't bring lobsters. Jerry and George, it's all yours. You got Captain Jerry Lehman and his colleague, George Stover. Thank you very much.
Okay, so you're on this machine.
to advocate for policy that protects the future of our marine resources.
Oh, just need to rewind this.
All right, I also got to do some other settings changes.
All right.
So can we close this?
Yep. Bear with me, I'm on tech savvy.
Quit this for a moment. Because I got to get to this screen here. And this is you right here?
Yep.
Now, is this where you want it to be
Yep.
from?
Start right there.
We're going to start with this.
Yep.
All right, let me make sure. I'm on.
Yeah.
We're going to start this video. Got it?
Yeah, I'll be around just a minute.
You don't have it. One last time.
NEPSA is comprised of wild seafood harvesters across all of them.
Well, I'm from the New England Fishermen Stewardship Association. My name is Jerry Lehman. I'm from Harpswell, Maine. I've been commercial fishing here in New England, well, since I was knee-high of a grasshopper. I started inshore, lobstering, sea urchining, urchin diving. We did sea mossing. I'm a fifth-generation commercial fisherman. My family and everybody in our family has done nothing but commercial fish all over the New England coast, the Grand Banks, even down to South America, tuna fishing. I created the New England Fishermen Stewardship Association along with my fellow fishermen. Offshore wind was one of the bigger pushing points that we had. NOAA has been cutting back the commercial fisheries allowable catches, which is keeping wild, hard, healthy product off the American dinner table. NEFSA is an alliance of wild harvesters of the waters off of New England dedicated to educating the public about how best to manage our seafood resources through sound science and the best practices of conservation used by fishermen with a view towards economic well-being, ecosystem sustainability, and the U.S. food securities. I'm going to open this up with just a quick 10-minute video. This kind of explains a little bit about NEFSA, what we're about, and what we're here to fight for.
NEPSA is comprised of wild seafood harvesters across all of our New England fisheries. We exist to advocate for policy that protects the future of our marine resources and the communities that depend on them. As stewards, we're responsible for looking out for our resources, not just today, but for the next generation. Stewards know that a short-term payoff isn't worth the long-term loss of our natural resources. That's why we oppose foreign profiteers polluting our waters in the name of offshore wind development. Before signing over our ocean to the highest bidder, there are questions we should answer. Questions like, how will installing this infrastructure change the environment? How will marine life survive the industrial urbanization of the ecosystem that it depends on?
Orsted has been bulldozing the ocean floor with the Osbit PLP 240 for South Fork Wind Farm, which is on glacial moraine, which is considered specific spawning grounds for southern New England cod, which is one of 5 distinct populations of cod. Bloomberg covered it. There was a letter written by the Northeast Fisheries Science Center, NIMS, National Marine Fisheries Service, telling BOEM that they foresee if they can do this, if they do their job, if they pile drive, there will be population level decreases of cod that would be extremely serious to the continued population of the species. The Osbit PLP 240, it bulldozed all over Cox's Ledge before National Marine Fisheries Service even know that they were there. It was a situation of beg for forgiveness as opposed to ask for permission.
How will fish and marine mammals navigate the labyrinth of mooring chains, floating platforms, and electrical cables for thousands of giant turbines? How will the ocean as a whole be affected by millions of gallons of water being heated up to 95 degrees by the offshore wind cooling stations? What about all the larvae being exposed to that hot water? Or exposed to the EMF from the cables? How will our food security be impacted by the loss of access to sustainable wild seafood?
What's the carbon footprint for catching a fish in Norway, then flying it over here, then trucking it to your grocery store? Before long, there ain't gonna be a US fisherman. But without a baseline prior study, we are literally walking in the dark here. I mean, sprinting in the dark, you know, eventually we're gonna hit a wall.
If you've been to New Bedford and seen this foreign garbage that they're throwing in that ocean, it will make you sick to your stomach.
This is today about celebrating that offshore wind is really happening. It's going to turn this northeastern wind into green, safe, American, and nice energy. When installed, these turbines are as large as 3 statues of liberties. This is only the first towers. Much more components will arrive.
No true fisherman can sit and witness what's going on the bottom on their daily basis and not be disheartened.
The bombardment of our waters with low-frequency sound from the seismic survey vessels is already affecting shellfish.
They're destroying an ecosystem under the guise of saving the environment.
We're getting green lights for these boats to go out here and destroy the environment. These survey boats that are coming up. Let me tell you something. I go out there fishing and that survey boat follows, and all of a sudden I'm catching scallops that are now coming up dead. Nothing has changed out there except the wind survey operations. As soon as they show up, my fishing dies.
There was survey boats there. We noticed that there was a lot of dead scallops. They were coming up what we call clappers. There were scallops that weren't open, but full of sand and mud. And you've always seen those before, but a couple a day this year, 16 or 20 dead ones in every bushel, that adds up. You know, by the end of the day, it's an extra 14 or 15 bushels. And that's something that I've never seen before. And I don't think most of these guys have either.
They're dead. They're gone. There's nothing in the shell, just solid shell.
The ongoing survey work is clearly disorienting marine mammals and contributing to their untimely deaths, desperate as the offshore wind lobby is to deny that.
It seems like they'll just make up anything to make the project look good.
Here, retired government scientist Dr. Bob Stern talks about the massive impact on whales being observed in the mid-Atlantic.
There have been a recent spike in whale and dolphin deaths that have occurred off the New Jersey and the New York coasts. Potential cause of that was the vessel surveys that are ongoing right now off the coast. And this was not a new issue for us. We had commented to the National Marine Fisheries Service over a year ago, before any of this started, that they were underestimating the impacts from these vessel surveys. Nevertheless, they went ahead, they approved them. So when we saw the whales washing on shore, we were doubly concerned that we had alerted people to this, but it was ignored. The agency since claimed that there's no evidence to link the vessel surveys to the whale and dolphin deaths. But we believe there is evidence. You just have to look for that evidence. And we have done that. Almost everywhere, with a few exceptions, whenever there was a whale death, there was at least one and more of these survey vessels present. So there is a correlation between when and where the whales died and the vessel presence. And this is just a piece of the evidence that we've assembled regarding the vessel surveys. We believe there's ample connections between the increased vessel survey, the spike in the whale deaths, to certainly warrant a thorough investigation. And we have tried to go through in a systematic way and illuminate for people these pieces of evidence. And we do have a report on this, which we're making available. It points to the vessel surveys as the most likely cause of the whale deaths. And we believe that the sites on the boards right now do violate a number of environmental statutes. The Marine Mammal Protection Act, the Endangered Species Act, the National Environmental Policy Act, and a number of state statutes as well. Regarding myself, I used to work in Washington for the Energy Department, managing the office that was responsible for making sure that the department's environmental impact statements were good. And by good, I mean that the impact statement is supposed to disclose fully all the good and the bad environmental impacts. The legal requirement is a full disclosure of environmental impacts, whether you like that or not. When I first saw how these projects were being presented, I did not see that full disclosure. In fact, I saw the opposite. I saw unsupported statements. You've heard, for example, that we need to do these projects to address climate change. But the real fact of the matter is these projects will do absolutely nothing for climate change. And that's not just me speaking. That is actually statements made by the federal agency, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, in some of their final environmental impact statements. In terms of where the world is headed on climate change, when you actually look at the science, the only effect of these projects, for example, on sea level rise, is to delay whatever sea level rise is coming, not reduce it. And those delays are in terms of weeks, perhaps months. There has never been any turbine like this removed. We have no experience worldwide with the dismantling and removal of a turbine this size. The federal agency, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, can decide to leave some turbines in place. They can allow them to be toppled in place and left on the seabed. And so there is no hard and fast requirement to even remove the structures, much less the cabling and the substations.
The effects of filling our oceans with these turbines and cables are far-reaching. Today's presentation will highlight energy concerns that all ratepayers need to be aware of.
I think you may have heard that electric costs will go down. That is kind of impossible. In fact, this is probably the most expensive way right now to produce electric power.
There's going to be senior citizens that aren't going to be able to afford their power. They're on a fixed income. It doesn't make any sense why they're pushing this so hard. And the amount of money behind these projects, it just seems like one big scam.
And this idea that foreign government-owned energy companies, Statoil, which is now Equinor, 67% owned by the Norwegian government, Ørsted, which is 51%.
Their former name is Jang, Danish Oil and Natural Gas. You have Atlantic Shores. They're owned by Shell Gas and EDF Renewables. You have Empire Wind. It's BP Gas.
It's a giant Ponzi scheme.
These are the oil companies.
Now, that's just a short video. Now, NEFSA's concerns are concerns of every commercial fisherman here in New England. mean, what does a commercial fisherman in New England bring to you, the US consumer? We bring wild, heart-healthy product that's good for you and your families. Very little people know that NOAA's even admitting that 82% of our seafood is now imported. 18% of our seafood is now only domestic. State of Maine just had 2 major storms. We've lost pretty much 50% of our infrastructure. Now we're already working and combating to regroup to get our infrastructure back up and running to try to keep wild, hard, healthy product. NOAA even put out last March of 23 with ROTA saying that if all energy resources were to be built, we would lose 68% commercial fisheries displacement. Well, just for me in our state in Maine, I mean, the third largest industry in the state of Maine is lobstering. It's over $1 billion industry. You lose 68% of that, that's $680 million out of the community just in the state of Maine alone. Now, we can network that across New Hampshire and Massachusetts too. I mean, right here, down in Vineyard Wind, you're going to directly impact your lobstermen. That's going to have direct impacts to you getting wild, hard, healthy product on the American dinner table and your family's dinner table for the long term. Anybody know how to shut this thing? Help? Oh, just gotta shut this one. All right. Right now, in the Gulf of Maine, we are waiting for the final WEAs for more floating offshore wind technology to be put in the Gulf of Maine. The Gulf of Maine, the green area, is where they're looking for wind development. Well, the problem is I've been fishing the Gulf of Maine ever since 2000 full time. I've spent 220 to 240 days a year at sea. Now, back in the 70s, when we had other organizations in all the world fisheries here, we were overfishing. You fast forward to 2000, we started to cut back the fleet. There's very few fishermen left here in New England. These are the men and women who spend 220 to 240 days a year out there bringing wild, hard, healthy product to the American dinner table. I have logbooks for the last 23 years using the same cod end that will show you that the catches in these areas have all increased over 23 years, but yet we are reducing our catch limits here. The science is not complete. It just can't be. During COVID, NOAA's Bigelow vessel did no surveys. So in 2019 to 2020, nothing was done. 2022 came along. Well, our fall assessment was only 82% complete. Well, in the Gulf of Maine, that only acquired 42 tows at 3 knots apiece for 20 minutes. That's 42 nautical miles. Well, the Gulf of Maine is a 36,000 square mile area. We literally only looked at 1/12 of 1%, but we're drawing conclusions, and we did a reduction in the catchable limits of haddock by 82%. Based on 1/12 of 1%. And now we're drawing conclusions on offshore wind. We don't know. What I do know is facts. The fact is I was out there with the same net for 23 years watching this over and over again. We know there's more fish out there than we've seen in 20 years, but we're being restricted for bringing it to you, the US consumer. This is just one of the problems. The Gulf of Maine is a counterclockwise spinning gyre. The currents and the nutrients flow from the Bay of Fundy, which run all the way down towards Nantucket, where it hits the Area 1. When it rides up the Georges Bank shoals, it hits the deep water frontage from the east, which gives it a counterclockwise spin. It's an entire counterclockwise spinning cycle. It's like a washing machine. So when we start to build anything in this area, the long-term effects are all the larval and all the spatial copepods, ichthyoplankton, and the phytoplankton will be directly impacted, and will be changing the environment through invasive species as well. Blue mussels and barnacles will grow on these floating structures. These are floating turbines. They're asking for the Gulf of Maine as well. So you're talking at least 1,500 turbines. That's 700 feet of water with 7-to-1 scope. So that means you're talking 15,000 feet of chain per turbine. Now you times that by 1440. That's a lot of obstruction for a bunch of whales. I didn't even give you the cables. We did the math on this. We figured if you ran out of Portland, Maine, you can go to Miami, back to Portland, Maine, back to Miami, and possibly enough slack to get to Key West as well, end for ending the chains. That's going to be an obstacle course. And to get you more on the technical details, I brought George Stover along with me. He's a commercial fisherman, lobsterman from the state of Maine. He's also got a background in power plant operations maintenance. So I'll just hand it over to him to finish up. Thank you.
Wow. The room filled up quick and I've got 5 minutes to do a 10-minute presentation. Sorry about that, but this is the most important piece. I was just, my background is I got 40 some odd years running power plants. I am the enemy, sorry. But I've worked all over the world. I've worked in Maine. I've worked in the Middle East. I ran Middle East operations for a valve company out of Houston. But what I looked at here, what I got involved with this was just because the fishermen really don't understand the technical side of a power plant. And this is a power plant. So I'm just going to dumb it down to fishermen to my level. How do I start this? Speaking of dumb. How do we go? Go ahead.
You have another slideshow?
This one. I want to go ahead with this one.
Okay.
Insert. Oh, slideshow from current slide.
From current slide.
We advance it right here.
Yeah, you can space bar like this.
Okay, well, this is the most important piece. I've got very limited time. And the lady before me stole about 80% of my presentation anyways. So this is a high voltage transmission system. Make no mistake of that. They call it a cable corridor. Are you kidding me? This is all the way up to 345. They didn't disclose any information. They said it would be between 220 and 345. 345 is the backbone of all electricity in New England. That is the highest voltage. That runs state to state. So if you look at this, they sort of dumbed it down to 0.7 of a mile. Well, I just sort of did a little math there, and that's about 12 football fields wide. What could go wrong here? What would be the impact of that? That is just amazing. So if you're looking at this, I differ a little bit for what I saw in my limited research. I'm not a cable expert, but these cables can run up to 90C, which is 194F. So this is variable power. So if you load this up, I'm guessing it's going to be somewhere around 180 degrees, 5 cables, 12 football fields wide coming to shore. That's just a cable corridor, right? Ah, wow. That is just amazing. That is really, you're putting radiant heat in the floor of the ocean. And really the array is the same thing. But then I got across the Brattle report. And then it came to me that this was just information about this one project, and they were looking at a project in a singular fashion. No, my point here is, I'll go through it pretty quick, but collectively, if you read the environmental impact, I read this whole report. It was probably a week of my life I will never get back again. Very little information, but on the cause and effects, the impact on the environmental was very, very informative. So if you're looking at variable power, you're 100% right. I ran combined cycle machines. They operated around 58 megawatts a minute. I also ran big utility boilers. They run about 3 megawatts a minute. They're Ferraris of the generation world. I mean, they're very, very advanced. They're very clean for fossil. I burned oil, nuclear, trashed energy. I've been involved in just about every segment of it. But if you look at some of the cost of this, I won't repeat what's already been told here, but this is 6 times the cost of a combined cycle plant. You'll never get your money back. According to EIA, which is a government report, the government ought to read their own reports. The maintenance is some of the highest fixed operation and maintenance costs of any generating equipment built today. $115.26 per kilowatt per year, every year. That's an astounding number. A little bit about gas turbines, right? They're going to start, I think this is a smaller one, but they're pretty much the same. They're in meters per second, so I sort of extrapolated that out on the side there. They get the full load about 26 miles an hour. Just to talk about variable, what's happening to the grid? I ran dispatchable machines. I need 200 megawatts now. Here you go. Oh, what's going to happen with wind? Well, I have to wait until the wind comes up. Today it's 5 to 15 with gusts to 20. These things don't reach full load till they hit 26 miles per hour. So in the back of this, what's happening is the wind is going 5 to 15. I got sweaty hands on a combined cycle unit going as fast as we can, hoping nothing happens. This is very unstable for the grid. Just personally from someone that's worked in this field my whole life. So at 25, 26 miles per hour, these things all shut off. Well, you better have something sitting in the background to run, or you're not going to be able to run your computers or whatever it is you want lights are for. So these are all facts right out of the COP, construction operation plan. These are going to be driven down to about 180 feet, and which was already discussed. Think about commissioning. How are you going to get these out of the ground? You're not going to. Come on, let's get real. Scour protection is going to be put in, which really I would never be able to do that if I have an oceanfront property. Come on, you know, they're dumping rocks. I'll go as quick as I can and make sense here. But this is miles of hot submarine cable all going to shore and the array. I'll add a little bit to your information about the array. But talking a little bit more about oil out there, there's not a lot of facts on design, output, cable, voltage, any of that. They gave an approximate, excuse me, over 3,000 gallons of oil in each wind turbine. We talked about radar disturbance. I won't go into that a little bit, but 6% of the array, the cables are going to come out. They drill down the casing first, the pedestal, and then you still got to bring the cable up and in. So I'm guessing they're going to cut a hole in the side of it and bring it up. But as those cables come up, you're exposing the cable to EMF, the environment to EMF from the cable. So I'm guessing they didn't say that they're going to use mats and then they're going to put riprap around it. Just a quick note, this is right out of the COP. The transformer is a big transformer. Each one of these and each one of the wind turbines, a little over 11,000 gallons. That's a lot of oil out there. I think this will be ready for anybody at the end here. This is just a standard. I don't have a pointer, but if you look and you can count, there's about 10 wind turbines a daisy chain together. So let's say they're all 10 megawatts. The first one is at around 10 megawatts, and cable temperatures are really dependent upon the load, not the voltage. So as I add load, the first one is going to give 10. So when we get the number 7, we got 70 megawatts. And I think we read the same report of 36 degrees, because that's the same number I got. And you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, the cable size increases, obviously, because you got more load. So by the time you get to 9 and 10, you got 90, 100 megawatts, you're up to 36 degree over ambient. Some of that's in the mud, some of it's rising up in and out of these wind turbines. Scour protection, ever stood on the beach and a wave comes over and touches your feet? What happens with the sand underneath your feet? It's no longer there. Same problem here. Problem is, though, if enough scours away, they become unstable. And by the way, the new class of wind turbines are having all kinds of structural issues. I'm not going to get into radar. You did a great job on radar. I'll just skip through this. But I won't skip through this. This is AIS. This is right out of the report. This is AIS. This is tracks of vessels going in and out of this area. And they only showed the one project. There's what, 13? Am I right on 13? Anyways, what could go wrong here when you can't use your radar in a storm? This spring, I think I spent 6 weeks leaving my mooring, not seeing land until I got back in the evening. What could go wrong? Electrical service platforms are nothing but switch yards, right? The generator makes electricity, let's say 10 megawatts. The 10 megawatts, I'm gonna get real quick here. Gosh, he's right on me already. I know, sorry. This can be read, but there's a lot. This is a breakdown of there's all kinds of diesel fuel. They have to have backup diesel generators. What if the cable goes down, right? They have to have it. I can't remember, there's over 5,000 gallons of diesel fuel alone on each electrical service platform. All this is these 10 wind turbines come together in one cable to a breaker in the switch yard or service platform, and that breaker is tied on a common bus to a transformer, which ups the voltage, shifts it off to shore. Scour protection, just dumping rocks. Nice, wish I could do that. Inner array, we've all seen these pictures. Everything about these projects is protecting the cable, protecting this equipment. It has nothing about the environment. And the matting, I'm not going to go into any depth other than as they install these, the lobsters and crabs and all the eggs will hide in this, and then they energize the cable. That will be quite a shock for the creatures in the way. But just a couple of quick notes here. The jet, this is right out of the report, runs between 3,000 and 12,000 gallons of salt water per minute. This is salt water with eggs, plankton, whatever is there, and it's going to be used as a high pressure water jet. They're gonna dig down 6 feet by 6 feet wide. That's 0.6 to 2.5 billion gallons of water for this project alone. Everything that's entrained is going to die. And me trying to keep things simple, 6 by 6, it equated out to, I can think in dump trucks, right? 542 13-yard dump trucks per mile until you get to the dredging. They're going down 25, 26 feet. So multiply that times 5. That's a lot of dump trucks waiting to dump it back in there, but I don't think it's going to go back in the hole. So again, the 36, you talked about that. I'm not going to. And then just one little quick thing on submarine noise. She's on me again. It's really the low frequency vibration, but take all of these noises, take the noise of the operation side, which they said very little about. You've got a wind turbine that every one of them is different. They all have a vibration signature. They all have a transformer. You ever heard of transformer? The same thing is going to happen in the electrical service platforms. They got transformers. They're big transformers. They're going to be a lot of noise. It's going to be vibration. They got the cable vibration. You got the cable heat, all in this one area where it used to be, let's talk about the right whale, it used to be their backyard. Wow, what a shock. Their backyard and their kitchen are now going to be full of wind turbines. And I better get out of here because I'm getting the dirty look. But no, that's no problem. But as you can see, this is right from Bohm. Even if you bury it to 6 feet, you still have, electric motor forces there. I'll say it has to be around 20 feet for my research before it really negates the EMF. And with that, commissioning. The last line here, which is most important, decommissioning. I read through the whole thing and every one of them said retire in place. And the very last page, 960, I don't know, I can't remember the page, but it was quite a ways and I was trying to stay awake. Whatever is best for the environment. Well, you know what they're going to do. They want to leave them there, right? So I would suggest what's best for the environment, don't do it.
Yeah, I'm supposed to keep people right on time because we have a real crunched afternoon. We lined up so many fabulous speakers. Blame me. So I'm going to introduce the folks from Nantucket now, Act for Wales, and their special guest. I think you're going to really have a good time here. I think what we might do to catch up with time is to let you guys do a break at your own leisure. How's that? I mean, just to dismiss this crowd for 10 minutes and then try to get everybody back. So if you need to take a break, go right ahead and then come back. Does that sound okay? All right, good. So come on up, Act for Wales. And thank you, George and Jerry Lehman. Thank you so much.
You have no audio.
Us? Okay, there it is. Hello. Hi, thank you. I'm Val Oliver from Nantucket Island, and I'm the president of Act for Wales, formerly known as Act Residents Against Turbines. Thank you for having us today. We're really happy to be here and meet everybody. Due to the importance of so many issues, we will be yielding some of our allotted time to two really special speakers. Bonnie Brady, Director of the Long Island Commercial Fishing Association, and Megan Lapp, Fisheries Liaison for Sea Freeze. Both Bonnie and Megan testified last week at the U.S. Congressional Field Hearing in Maryland.
I'm sure you'll be interested in what they have to say. And right now, I'd like to introduce you to my fellow Act for Wales board member, Amy DeCibio.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. I'm going to book through this, and some of the material will be a little bit redundant, and so I'll go even faster. But let's just start. This first slide is something that you saw from Lisa earlier. It's just to give you some perspective. I know you all see turbines here on the Cape. The ones that are happening offshore will be very much larger, really more comparable to the size of the Chrysler building in New York or the John Hancock Tower in Boston. This blue sort of Pac-Man piece is the Vineyard Wind lease area, the Vineyard Wind project that is currently underway. You can actually see the turbines at night from Hyannis. And as large as it is, take a look at it versus the size of Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard. Those are the two islands there if you're not familiar with the geography. What's more shocking is what's coming. So that little blue Pac-Man is now a little green Pac-Man in the northeast corner. And these are really sizable projects. This is a gigantic array, as we've explained earlier. This is, this will be an array larger than the state of Rhode Island. So let's talk a minute about Act for Wales. As we said, our group was formerly known as Act Residents Against Turbines. We've tried to come up with a little bit of a more positive name. But our primary environmental concern is the impacts from offshore wind power plants. And we really believe that they will destroy the safe haven for the critically endangered North Atlantic right whale. There's been so much effort to try to preserve this endangered species. And it's not just because they're beautiful, majestic creatures, but they also play a very important role in the ocean. And Bonnie Brady will probably talk about that a little bit more. But it's very important to the biodiversity, and really they provide a very important role for the food chain. And we're not the only ones that think that. A couple of, this was last year, I believe the New Bedford Lights, one of their journalists exposed a letter through a Federal Freedom of Information Act. And there was a lot of publicity about it. I think there should have been a lot more. But Sean Hayes has a pretty big role as the chief of protected species at NOAA's National Northeast Fisheries Science Center. And he'd written a letter to the Department of Interior expressing some of these same concerns around the North Atlantic right whale, and in particular, that offshore winds could really cut the production of zooplankton. And that, again, is the basis of the food chain. He suggests a buffer zone, but essentially the overriding comment from the report was that there is no mitigation for this, that essentially you can't build these offshore wind power plants in this area. The buffer zone he was talking about is the zone between the red and the blue line. So you'll see that impacts every one of the projects in this lease area. The next few slides I'm going to show you, these are all slides. These are NOAA's slides themselves. The overwhelming takeaway from all of them is that much more research is needed. However, all of these projects have received permitting, or the Vineyard Wind project has received permitting. So I won't go into too much depth here on sound, but I will tell you that the Save the Right Whales Coalition, a coalition that many of the speakers and their organizations belong here today, did produce a report recently that shows that there is a direct link between the survey work and the whale deaths that we are seeing, an absolute correlation, despite what you are reading in the newspapers. And I think Lisa Quattrocchi-Knight gave a pretty good explanation as to what's going on there. Similar with hydrodynamics, I think the line across the top says it all. Effects of large-scale wind projects on local and regional currents and weather patterns are unknown. That's a little scary, especially when you're on Nantucket, 30 miles out to sea. It also indicates that there's much more research needed for understanding EMFs. I won't elaborate on that. We've talked about that. This is a little bit of a different picture that Lisa showed earlier from this UK study, but it does show deformed lobsters, and they are attributing it to EMFs in the cabling. One thing I think is incredibly important here, there's always a lot of, we throw the words green and renewable around all the time like they mean the same thing. They don't. Wind is a renewable energy source, but I think we've talked about a lot of reasons why this is not a green project, including all of the components that go into making a turbine. We're talking about steel, cement. We've talked about all the oil that are in these projects and the cabling that they're being pile driven into the ground. And I think that's a very important distinction that everyone really needs to get a handle on. Renewable does not mean green. I think the most important thing on this slide, though, really is the last sentence that's highlighted. And again, that's been mentioned twice in two other earlier reports, that essentially, you know, the government's own words are saying that their own documents relating to all of these projects are clear, that the impact on climate change will be so small that it will be immeasurable. So I guess I scratch my head and say, you know, what's the point? Another thing that we should all be thinking about here is, hang on, let me just catch up. I'm trying to fly through this so fast. Energy from offshore wind is expensive. So on a very practical level, yesterday the market price for energy, for electricity in southern New England was less than $27 a megawatt hour. The Vineyard Wind Power Purchase Agreement is contracted over a 20-year average nominal cost of $89 a megawatt hour. That's a gigantic difference. I think it's also important to note that two of the projects, Avangrid projects, have pulled. Okay, so this is Commonwealth and Park City Wind, both citing economics, saying interest rates have climbed, we've got supply chain issues. But I think what's important to understand there is they have paid $70 million in fines to do that. They plan to come back to the table to renegotiate. $89 is not going to be what they're looking for. They're looking for more. So we, the New England ratepayers, will be footing that bill. It's pretty clear that rates will not be getting cheaper. Just to talk a little bit about Nantucket. Nantucket is the largest and one of the oldest national historic landmarks in the United States. And one of the main reasons it has that important designation is because of the view shed. That view shed is enjoyed by people who come to Nantucket to visit from all over the world. And like the Cape, Nantucket relies heavily upon tourism. If you can take a look at this slide, this is what's coming. This is not our slide. This is coming from the Vineyard Wind DEIS, I believe, or the South Coast Wind DEIS, sorry. This is a slice of it, but this is the view from Sanford Farm, so we're not even on the coast here. There are a couple of outstanding reasons why we have not heard too much about this until more recently. And they're a little bit touchy, but I think it's something that we really need to consider. Everybody here probably remembers when Cape Wind was supposed to be, building their power plant here in Nantucket Sound. And that project was successfully thwarted by a group, Save Our Sound. And the sad part is we don't hear much from them these days. In fact, we see on their website that they actually list among their supporters some wind companies. They were also heavily involved in siting the projects on the other side of Nantucket. So it's a shame because they've had a great voice. They have a lot of credibility. They have a lot of backing by a lot of organizations and municipalities around the Sound, but it's I think that's really kind of unfortunate. Similarly, another touchy subject are the many 501c3s that have unfortunately taken money from the wind companies. So again, this potentially compromises their voices. We are not hearing enough from them. These are all very important organizations that have been the tried and true organizations standing behind the North Atlantic right whale and standing behind the health of our ocean. And when they're not speaking, our legislators don't hear them and we don't hear them. So I think that it's one of the reasons why we're all pretty late to the game on this. Just quickly, because I know we're running out of time, I just wanted to let you know our organization does have a lawsuit. We have the first lawsuit against the first project, against the Vineyard Wind project. We are in U.S. appeals. Thank you. Can thank Val Oliver for that. We are in the U.S. appeals court right now, and we are hoping that this Chevron deference thing gets overturned in the Supreme Court, and maybe that'll help all of our cases. But the essence of the lawsuit is, hey, U.S. government, you're not paying attention and following your own endangered species and environmental protection laws. That's the gist. You can read the details on our website if you'd like, actforwhales.org. Just so it's clear here, this Vineyard Wind project is the tip of the spear. All of the other projects that come up use that, and the baseline is lowered. The standard has been lowered. So I think that that's something that everyone should consider. It's very important to be pushing back against these projects. And lastly, I'll just leave you with, it's great to be here with everyone. I think it's important that we all work together. Everybody's voices collectively can maybe stop the madness. Stay wild. Thank you. I now want to introduce Bonnie Brady, who's going to come up and do a quick presentation for you as well.
Fine, quick.
Yeah.
Need the glasses. I do, and I did this thing, so I put that there. Okay, come over here.
Where that comes up with a messaging saying what it is.
Okay, so you want some sound?
Yeah.
I don't have all of them with sound. I have a couple. Hold on, let me get there. La, la. Almost there, I swear. Oh, here we go.
Testing audio.
There we go. I hear it. Yep. Okay, let me turn those off now. Okay. Hi, gang. Can you guys all hear me? Hi, I'm Bonnie Brady. I'm the Executive Director of the Long Island Commercial Fishing Association, and this is probably my second PowerPoint ever, so bear with me. I got a little bit of a starting out from there. Let me start from the beginning, and I will do my best to whip through this in the present of time. And since quite a few people actually took over parts that I was going to say, it might be faster than that. All right, let's see. There we have it. Okay. When people think of offshore wind, what comes to mind is this view, the 5-6 megawatt turbines that were put into Block Island waters in 2016. This is what I refer to as the Barbie and Ken model. Looks harmless, right? Unless you get hit by lightning. The next slide is of a turbine offshore Wicklow, Ireland that was hit by lightning in 2022. I'll wait until the good stuff starts. I got this from a friend of mine who lives in Ireland, who fishes. Oh. Great balls of burning fiberglass. Some of the environmental concerns of the fishing industry regarding offshore wind are related to high-resolution geophysical and geotechnical site surveys, construction and operational noise, and what this all will do to migrations of everyone under the waterline in the ocean ecosystem. Sound is the most important sense if you are a fish or a marine mammal. Your entire day can be about finding prey, not being eaten, communicating with others, and meeting mates using sound for all of it. Too much sound can cause temporary or permanent deafness, forcing changes to your feeding or breeding patterns or masking the predator you are trying to avoid. Permanent threshold shifts, known as PTS, is permanent deafness. For baleen whales, 219 decibels is the magic number, with 183 decibels also creating PTS as a cumulative sound exposure, which is defined as a lower level of sound, but for an animal that is exposed to it for a longer duration. This is from the BOEM-sponsored Endangered Species Workshop for Offshore Wind in 2017. The descriptions are from NOAA Protected Resources Marine Mammal Act definitions. Level A harassment, potential to injure. Level B harassment, mostly behavioral. Note what I think is the most important phrase on that slide. Incidental means not intentional, does not mean unexpected. Note level B harassment includes temporary deafness, and level A harassment includes permanent deafness and minor lung or other tissue damage from explosive exposure. That's some harassment. This is some of the various equipment used for site survey. Pay special attention to the boomers up top, the sparkers, and the chirps. They specifically can have an impact on low-frequency hearing baleen whales. Boomers, by the way, are a single or a double air gun, kind of like, carrying the boombox back in the 80s. Same thing. You can see where the chirps are there. This chart speaks to the different hearing capabilities of ocean animals. Note for baleen whales, they can hear for both the sparkers, boomers, sub-bottom profilers, acoustic cores, and I have seen some that actually they think can hear the acoustic positioning systems. This is what the Block Island wind farm looked like when they were making it. On the left are some of the piles for the jacket, and on the right was the hammer that was used. The hammers they're planning on using now for pile driving are about 3 times the size. Now let's see if this one works. Let's see. I bring you pile driving. Bubble curtains, we are told, are used for pile driving as a way to protect whales. Unfortunately, low frequency sound under 200 hertz is not reduced by bubble curtains. That's from BOEM's own documents. Noise causes both auditory and non-auditory effects. If you're a fish and you get too close to the sound of pile driving and have a swim bladder, it ruptures. It's a really bad day. And it's not just sound in decibels that affects ocean animals, especially fish. It's particle wave pressure, and it can induce temporary or permanent induced deafness. Pile driving may have near field lethal effects on fishes and invertebrates with particle motion rather than sound pressure alone. I know, being on the ambulance squad, basically it's a concussive wave, and that concussive wave jars your body into whatever you hit, the internal organs into whatever's holding on to them. So those are the kind of animals that they don't have a swim bladder. They could just wind up with lesions and then swim off to die. The sounds we make in the sea may interfere with the ability of fishes to detect and use sounds of biological relevance and could have substantial impact on their fitness and survival. Now, these are the sounds of pile driving from 500 meters and then again from 18 miles away, except they are mixed up for the audio. So this is 500 meters away. And this, okay, I gotta stop that. There we go. No. Gonna become that. And this is from 18 miles away. This is a photo of a jet trencher. The one on the right there, there's also an additional ROV. That jet trencher also has what they refer, that piece on the left there is for cutting chain and for using it to jet trench into the ocean. Jet plowing has obviously liquefies the ocean floor, and let me see if I can get this one to work. This might be a great day, but I'm not sure if it's going to work. No, okay, that one didn't. Sorry about that. Jet plowing is capable of causing temporary deafness due to DP vessel thrusters during installation. For the Block Island project, the hot zone for 120 decibels of level B harassment was 9.7 miles. You stole my thunder, Jerry. The Osbit PLP 240, the Oceans bulldozer used by Ørsted all over Cox's Ledge, which is considered glacial moraine habitat for one of the more sustainable stocks of cod left on the Atlantic coast. The same area that NIB scientists warned about. While pile driving is the most injurious noise of construction, jet plowing and jet trenching can kill fish and other marine organisms from larvae to young of the year. Animals that burrow, like the horseshoe crab, and slow-moving mollusks like conch and scallops don't stand much of a chance. And they plan for tens of thousands of miles of cables crisscrossing the ocean floor. The Living Stone is an example of a cable-laying vessel. AC cables used for offshore wind industry emit heat, electricity, and magnetic field. Heat is reduced by burying AC cable, but not past 6 feet or the cable cooks, which is another reason for burying cables, unless you are an animal that buries in the sand. When it comes to EMF, some fish like skates and sharks love it, and cod and lobsters appear to be repelled by it. As Lisa mentioned earlier, DC cable and lobster larvae don't seem to do well, according to Harriet University in the UK, that exposed them over time to direct current and found those exposed can't swim. Contrary to the popular turbines will build reef myth, it's actually called biofouling, which displaces the biodiversity of the area by adding structure where there was none. Over time, steel monopiles become overloaded with mussels and other invasives, sea squirts, starfish. If not enough current flows in the area of the monopile, the nitrogen waste coming from them can create mini dead zones. This is leading edge erosion, which can occur from general wear and tear to fiberglass wind blades. This is a photo from 2020. Dutch fishermen towed this up, a fiberglass strip glued together like paper mache to help to make up a wind blade. Wind turbine blades are made with sheets of fiberglass held together with rigid epoxy resin, which is made with BPA. When the resin breaks, BPA leaks out of the blades. Wind turbine blades spin at 170 miles an hour. When rain hits them, the rain hits at 300 miles an hour. And as a result, the blades suffer pitting from the rain and eventually break down, destabilizing them. They have to be refiberglassed yearly. Within the first 5 years, blades can break down due to defects, lighting, and surface damage and structural cracks. The wind wake effect describes how the first row of turbines in the ocean gets the most wind and how downstream turbines lose airflow due to wakes. Those of you that sail and/or race know how important it is to be in front of the wind. Blockage effect is from the wind slowing as it approaches the wind farm, and wake effect takes place behind the turbines where there is less wind and more mixing turbulence, which affects temperature and humidity, and in some cases can create its own microclimate like fog. This is the Horns Rev wind farm. In 2013, NASA used a satellite to be able to take pictures of the wind wake effect happening in the UK from space. The problem, however, was not only the effect on the water, but huge underwater sand sediment plumes up to 3.5 miles long and up 500 feet wide, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with scour pits behind each turbine up to 120 feet deep. That's the Thanet wind farm pictured by Dong Energy, now known as Ørsted. The fishermen in the area used to fish for cod daily. Once the wind farm was put in, the cod abandoned the area. Now they have to go farther to catch the fish, who shockingly don't like sand in their gills. That's the Landsat. In 2021, researchers in Germany began looking at the wind wake effects in the North Sea as many more turbines were scheduled to be built. It was then that the modeling of the large-scale effects of adding much larger offshore wind turbines began. And in 2022, the barn doors flew open. The Harian folks from Germany had started modeling the effects of offshore wind on ocean dynamics and came up with a hydrodynamic model that measured the area throughout the seasons. They found currents were dramatically affected, creating alterations of the temperature and salinity distribution in areas of wind farm operation. Ultimately, they showed it affected the stratification development in the southern North Sea, impacting marine ecosystem processes. Several months later, an ROV was able to capture the actual proof of mixing and seasonal upwelling and downwelling patterns due to offshore wind turbines. Then in November of 2022, the shocker, when some of the same folks that originally discussed wind wake effect showed up to show a plus or minus 10% loss in upwelling and downwelling, the basic methodology by which the ocean feeds itself, not only at the offshore wind farm clusters, but also distributed over a wider region. And the sea surface temperature within the wind area increased, mimicking climate change. They basically showed that ongoing offshore wind farm developments could have a substantial impact on the structuring of coastal marine ecosystems on basin scales. And compared to the North Sea and the EU, the US is slated to have far larger turbines than any other country, and more of them. 2.1 million acres, is that right, Megan? 2.3 million acres, up to 3,000 turbines, up to 1,065 feet tall. That's an older picture. They will be taller than the Eiffel Tower. I have 6 more. These are examples of offshore substations. Those that must go long distances will convert AC to DC cables using cooling water intake systems that suck up to 8.1 million gallons per day of seawater and release it as 90-degree effluent. The same cooling water intake systems that are not allowed to be built on land for any new build, but apparently the ocean's fair game. Now, for those of you that are trying to save Dowsey's Beach, I suggest you look to Block Island for their history. Both cables were dug in 2015, juiced in 2016, and unearthed 9 months later, to the tune of $31 million. Exposed 8 months after they were sunk, took 6 years of false starts to finally be reburied. Lisa already spoke to all the projects. This is the Rhode Island, Massachusetts wind energy area specifically. 1,409 square miles, larger than Rhode Island or Long Island, and 2/3 the size of the Grand Canyon National Park. Now imagine you're staring at that vista. Now put 1,065-foot tall turbines spaced a mile apart in each direction for as far as you can see. That's the Rhode Island Mass wind energy area if it is built out completely. Please help us fight this. You don't destroy the environment to save it. Thank you very much.
Megan Lapp, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. I don't have any slides, so I'll be brief. Today, I'm going to briefly speak about offshore wind interference with radar. It is a huge unaddressed issue. There have been joint U.S. agencies working on this since 2014 in the form of the WTRIM, the Wind Turbine Radar Interference Mitigation Working Group, comprised of the DoD, the DOE, FAA, NOAA, and BOEM. Their stated mission was to, by 2025, have a solution to the multiple kinds of radar interference caused by offshore wind turbines. They have accomplished nothing in 10 years. They have no solutions, so they re-upped their MOU last year. To give you an idea of local impacts here, in 2017, the WTRIM determined that radar interference caused by offshore wind leases off of Massachusetts and Rhode Island could not be solved by conventional mitigation approaches, and that such approaches could not restore low altitude radar coverage. Yet 2 offshore wind farms off Rhode Island and Massachusetts are being constructed as we speak. Think about that if you plan on flying to the islands. Another local impact is that the fact that offshore wind farms interfere with all classes of marine radar, which is a major safety hazard for both commercial and recreational mariners. In 2018, I went to the Coast Guard headquarters to discuss the issue with the Chief of the Office of Navigation Systems. As I placed several offshore wind radar interference studies on the table, the captain was shocked, completely unaware of the issue. Upon leaving that meeting, when we asked what should our next steps be, Coast Guard personnel responded, "We don't know what to tell you. This is literally the first we've heard of this." Leases had already been issued and BOEM was already reviewing wind farm construction plans at that point. In 2019, the Coast Guard conducted a port access route study off the coast of Massachusetts and Rhode Island regarding offshore wind. In multiple comments, I asked for U.S. Coast Guard to investigate and analyze marine radar interference as part of that study. The Coast Guard report denied impacts, despite a radar interference modeling study conducted by the Coast Guard itself on the Cape Wind project in 2009. Notably, Coast Guard staff in charge of that study left the agency prior to the finalization of the study to become the head of marine affairs for a prominent offshore wind turbine or offshore wind company holding multiple leases in the area of analysis. In 2022, the National Academies of Sciences released a report entitled Wind Turbine Generator Impacts to Marine Vessel Radar, confirming years of issues I'd raised to BOEM and the Coast Guard and quoting part of my Coast Guard submission comments. The study identified areas of potential future research, but no immediate solutions. However, in 2019, prior even to the 2022 report, the Coast Guard had admitted via correspondence that its own vessels would be impacted by offshore wind radar interference. The Coast Guard also admitted that it does not conduct an independent radar interference analysis, even on its own vessel capabilities, instead leaving this to the developer's own navigational risk assessment. More recently, the U.S. Air Force requested that Congress enact legislation to prevent construction of wind farms on land within 2 nautical miles of the nation's nuclear missile silos, specifically due to the need to fly helicopters in those areas. According to the Air Force, wind turbines create both physical obstacles and turbulence that make wind farms, quote, really dangerous to fly into with a helicopter. The Coast Guard uses helicopters as a primary tool for maritime search and rescue. If flying helicopters in a wind farm is dangerous for the Air Force, the same is true for the Coast Guard. In fact, the official Coast Guard transcript regarding official fishing vessels sinking off Rhode Island in 2019 states 6 times that one of the reasons for aborting the helicopter search for potential survivors, in addition to poor weather conditions, was hazards in the area named as the Block Island wind farm turbines. 2 out of 3 men died that day. There are only 5 Block Island turbines, not the thousands planned coastwide. Vessels don't sink in good weather. They sink in bad weather when visibility is poor, when vessel radar needs to work, and helicopters need to fly low. The fact is that a major mission of the U.S. Coast Guard, that of search and rescue, will be compromised due to offshore wind farm interference with its own vessels' radar and helicopter operations. Yet it still has not conducted any comprehensive assessment of the level of reduction in its own capabilities due to offshore wind. This means that U.S. mariners' lives will be put at risk, and there is no plan to ensure that rescue is possible. Additionally, HF or high frequency radar, which the Coast Guard uses for search and rescue and NOAA uses for oil spill response, will be compromised. BOEM has known about this issue since 2014. A national impact will be interference with defense radar. A 2018 DoD offshore wind mission compatibility assessment ruled much of the offshore East Coast as a wind exclusion zone for defense and defense training purposes. This included East Coast offshore wind areas with active leases under BOEM. Rather than eliminating the leases, development moved ahead. The DoD has listed the following types of DoD-managed radars as vulnerable to offshore wind radar interference: nearshore military terminal area air traffic control radars, en route air traffic control radars in support of the DoD and FAA, air defense long-range surveillance radars, weather radars like NEXRAD, ground-based military unique radars like ATHEMS and Rother radars, missile tracking radars, such as located at Wallops Island and Cape Canaveral. In 2019, the Undersecretary of Defense actually admitted that ARSR-4 primary long-range air surveillance radars, which are located along the U.S. East Coast and all U.S. borders and used to monitor incoming flying objects, are, quote, very susceptible to interference from wind turbines, and that target tracking abilities decrease as turbine number, size, and density increases. The U.S. is not unique in this situation. The U.K. has been grappling with the issue for some time. Early in 2010 to 2012, the UK Ministry of Defense knew that offshore wind interference with its air defense radar was a problem and developed what they thought was a solution. That solution became mandatory mitigation for offshore projects. But in 2018, after a wind farm was built in the line of sight with a UK air defense radar, the UK Ministry of Defense came back and reported that the mitigation didn't work. But by then it was too late. The wind farm was in. Since that time, the UK Ministry of Defense has been hosting grant competitions to anyone who can solve the problem, still without a solution. Meanwhile, as of 2022, Japan's defense ministry found installed wind to be interfering with its anti-missile defense radar and is calling on offshore wind farm construction to be halted. At the same time, Taiwan confirmed that wind turbines could interfere with its surface-to-air missile systems, and that the low-frequency noise generated by the turbines is likely to affect the reflected radio waves that phased array radars need to detect signals of missiles or aircraft. As I mentioned at the beginning, the U.S. Federal Interagency WTRIM was supposed to have developed solutions to these same problems by 2025 and have been working on them for 10 years. With no solutions, they have re-upped their MOU. The question then is why projects are allowed to be built knowing the impacts but having no solutions. Doing so is irresponsible and dangerous. Thank you.
Well, ocean people, thank you, because I got a major education this morning and I really appreciate your coming here and teaching us about this from that side of things. So thank all of you. We're going to move on shore now, and we're going to start with my colleague and friend, Adam Myrick from Save Greater Deuces Beach. Don't take too long, Adam.
You guys have my thumb drive? I give it to you. Is there any audio on your presentation? Nope, no audio. Yours is one that's simply called presentation? Correct. I just use the arrow key to go forward? Let's get you into the presentation first, and you would be using the arrow key. Perfect. All right. Now there it is there. Yep.
Thanks very much. Everybody hear me? All right. My name is Adam Myrick, and I'm here on behalf of Save Deuces. I'd like to begin today by stating our positions because we've been smeared as fossil fuel funded alarmist NIMBYs. So I figured you'd rather hear it from us in terms of what we do stand for. Save Deuces unequivocally supports renewable energy. We aren't opposed to offshore wind. We're neutral on that. We are opposed to bringing the power onshore. There's no dark money behind us. We're 100% volunteer and 100% funded by the donations of our concerned neighbors. We've offered to have our books audited to prove it. And that offer stands. Our organization is also apolitical. Our membership is split evenly between registered Republicans, Democrats, and independents. Save Dowses is against sacrificing protected conservation land in the name of corporate profits. We support renewable energy, and our community is already doing our part. We cannot support a risky, unnecessary, and understudied transmission plan endangering Cape Cod's single freshwater aquifer, Cape Cod's local environment and green space, Cape Cod's economy, and our family's safety. Cheaper, better, and safer alternatives do exist. So who am I and why should you care about what I think? I worked in electricity for over 20 years, helping to bring new power plants, including onshore wind and solar, into service. I'm an expert in US electricity markets. How we generate power matters. How we transmit that power also matters. So I want to start today by asking you to imagine a scenario. The federal government has leased offshore areas near Martha's Vineyard to energy developers. Private companies have bid and won the rights to develop them. Floating ships have been hard at work for years. Giant conduits from these offshore platforms are coming ashore on residential beaches full of energy. Now, I want you to imagine that they're pipes full of oil. Imagine the studies the state of Massachusetts would require. Comprehensive environmental impact studies carried out by independent third parties. Remediation plans, spill containment plans. Imagine the court filings, the stern letters sent to federal regulators. Imagine how hard our state officials would be fighting if the fossil developers wanted to come ashore through Massachusetts constitutionally protected Article 97 lands. And rightly so. But actually, we don't need to imagine. A 2015 natural gas pipeline company wanted to come through Article 97 protected lands in Sandusfield, Mass, the Otis Forest and Spectacle Pond area. Then Attorney General Healy objected strongly, as we can see in this memo. You'll see this memo was actually written by Melissa Hoffer, who's since been promoted to become Massachusetts' first climate chief. You'll see they advocated for the very same things that we're asking for now: more study, rigorous impact and alternative assessments, and preservation of protected lands. She wants the state to propose that FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, combine reviews of several pending projects into a single process, a combined environmental impact study, to avoid piecemeal review, to utilize a common analysis, and to compare each project's impacts and benefits. She goes on to ask them to scrutinize and condition any approval on adherence to two important Massachusetts policies, including avoiding Article 97 protected conservation land. This is Attorney Healy, Healy when she was Attorney General. She also insists on a thorough review of all reasonable alternatives. So that was from Melissa Hoffer stating Healy's position. This is a letter from Healy. I think she nails it here. She says the Commonwealth's substantial investment to constitutionally protected conservation land should not be subject to eminent domain when less disruptive alternatives can meet the same needs. So, again, I think she really nails it here. I'm just very sad that she no longer feels the same way. So I also want to show that it wasn't just Healy and Hoffer that felt this way. There were 63 agencies, 63 organizations under the Massachusetts Land Trust that signed here, including the organization with the individual who wrote the op-ed this week in the Cape Cod Times. So conservation sometimes. You'll also see on here some other names you recognize. And this is why Save Dowses exists, because a lot of these names are people you would expect to fight this, but they've been silent. I think other people have already talked about why they might be silent. So in my oil drilling example, and in this gas pipeline case, the state would never accept fossil fuel companies saying, trust us, it'll be fine. And yet, that's what the state is doing with Avangrid. Billions of watts of electricity under a popular beach through a picturesque part of the state, dependent on tourism, and then interconnected to a substation sitting atop the sole freshwater aquifer. But we're told just to accept the risks are tiny because Avangrid said so. Given Attorney General Healy's strong views on protecting Article 97 conservation land in 2015, it leaves us wondering why Governor Healy demurred since becoming governor. She had a reason, a politician's reason. Changing the plan might have caused the state to miss the 2030 carbon emission target. She might have to run for re-election with that hanging over her. But then developers gave her a gift. They defaulted. It's an opportunity to redo it. But so far, they haven't taken the chance to do things the right way. And it's easy to say, this is a Healy issue, this is an Avangrid issue, this is a past town council issue. But really what we have is a problem of critical thinking, a lack of critical thinking, failure to think beyond the next election, failure to ensure public servants serve the public. There's so much pressure to get this done that execution is going to be sloppy. And anyone who questions the execution is apparently a fossil fuel loving alarmist fueled by dark money. There is no doubt there is a very close relationship between elected officials, the companies awarded heavily subsidized contracts, and the agencies tasked with overseeing them. There's a lot of money at stake. The senior Avangrid exec in charge of the local projects was the commissioner of the Massachusetts DEP. The CEO of Vineyard Offshore, well, she used to run the Massachusetts environmental review process. We heard about another, I won't say conflict, but another interesting relationship earlier from another speaker, but it's all very cozy. And it's all about securing heavily subsidized contracts. That's the business model. That's where the money is. Offshore wind should be cost-effective, safe, and environmentally friendly, at least as cost-effective, safe, and environmentally friendly as an onshore wind project. Avangrid has claimed that it is, and told residents that the old contracts were going to lower rates by 0.1%. Woohoo. But now they've defaulted, and they'll offer the same power from the same leases into the next auctions at much higher prices, and electric rates will go up. Now let's talk about the onshore grid implications of the current one-off or unplanned transmission approach. Here's a quote from Eric Hyannis. He's a professor at Tufts and leads their offshore wind energy graduate program. Quote, the slated offshore wind installations could easily overwhelm and congest the existing land-based grid, damaging the industry's reputation and shortchanging its growth potential. Have you ever had swollen hands or feet? That's blood pooling in your extremities. It can't get out. The same would happen here with electricity. And that's why massive and expensive transmission upgrades are underway and many more will be needed. Here's what the Brattle Group had to say in a 2020 study about costs and grid stability. They performed studies for a lot of the Fortune 500 and also for the regional electric grid, the folks keeping the lights on here today. This study was commissioned by Envarg. They do make undersea cables, but again, Brattle Group is very credible. I don't think they would shill for just one client and put the rest of their practice at risk. I've highlighted some key numbers here. So take a look. Overloads equal outages. So we're going to put in a whole bunch of wind turbines off the coast here. And locally, we're going to have a less stable grid. And look at the cost too. The cost of this willy-nilly approach is 3 times. So 5 times the outages, 3 times the cost. I don't know about you, but sounds like when I go dishwasher shopping, I look for the same thing, right? I mean, it's just common sense. So I'm not saying this study is perfect. I think it's a small study, but I'm saying this issue needs more study. And many people agree. This study only contemplated a few thousand megawatts of offshore wind. We're talking about 10 times that number if all 30 are built. So in addition to instability and higher cost, this new transmission infrastructure poses risks, not just to the beaches and estuaries, but disrupts the local tourist economy. It disrupts local businesses along the transmission routes. It risks our only aquifer. You're going to hear more about that later. And it's also loss of green space. There are also public safety issues, which you'll hear more about later, and quality of life issues. And that's after it's fully onshore. If you're a boater, you know how harsh and unforgiving the marine environment is. We've learned a lot today. We've heard a lot today from people that know quite a bit more about the offshore part than we do. Our organization has been focused on the onshore impacts. Well, what is the impact when fluids leak? When a splicing bolt catches fire? Why would we not hold these wind companies and these transmission companies to the same standard as a fossil fuel company? So what is the alternative to the current unplanned approach? Said simply, you connect the offshore wind farms to an offshore grid and then bring it all ashore at existing or decommissioned power plants. If you have to look at the different alternatives, if it is going to happen, what's the least impactful? Given the size of these windshore installations, nothing is truly plug and play, but the cost to upgrade an existing site should be far less than greenfield development, and it also preserves the green spaces. How do I know this? How does Avangrid know this? How does the Healy administration know this? Well, we read it in that 2020 study by the Brattle Group. Google invested in offshore grid research as early as 2010. Researchers at Tufts have published research. New York State thinks it's such a promising idea that they actually have pending legislation compelling the study. To change the current course, the state has to change what they're asking for in their solicitations. Avangrid and other developers are responding to the subsidies the state is dangling. Change won't happen with the developers. It has to come from the states, and it's not too late. Sadly, there seems to be little appetite to change. When we've raised the issues of safety, environmental impact, and overly cozy relationships, we've been painted as NIMBY whiners. We were told to trust that they knew better. Well, we've followed Attorney General, not Governor, Healy's model and said, prove it. If it's true, that should be easy. Prove it safe. Do the studies. Show us there's no viable alternative. And instead, Avangrid deployed PAC money into our local town elections, and they lost because they can't prove it. And there are viable alternatives. Avangrid claims that they are environmentalists, and reading their ads, full-page ads in the Globe, you'd think that they're doing this for the good of the Cape and the residents. After 20 years of dealing with energy companies and evaluating hundreds of green energy projects, I can confidently say there are no for-profit environmentalist companies. Avangrid is at best an incidental environmentalist. They aren't doing us a favor. They're business people who want to earn a 13% IRR, a way of calculating return on a project. If our tax dollars or electric rates were subsidizing them to build new gas plants, I'm sure they would do that. And by the way, their parent company does own and operate fossil. And for all the folks claiming that dark money is behind opposition to landing at Dow's and offshore, wake up. Fossil fuel companies aren't fighting offshore wind. They're getting into it. They want a piece of the subsidies. Total, BP, Equinor, Chevron, Shell, all these oil majors have investments, in offshore wind or business lines. Exxon's investing heavily in carbon sequestration. They're chasing the money, free money. Just like the Spanish parent of Avangrid, and just like the Qatar wealth fund that owns nearly 15% of Avangrid. I think Qatar might have some oil investments too. Avangrid likes to claim that they're paying for our sewers. You've probably heard that in their radio ads, right? Only the first phase of sewering is going to cost over $1.4 billion. I believe that's a pre-COVID estimate, so it's going to be a lot higher, and that's for the first phase. The total contractual obligation that Avangrid has to the town of Barnstable on the 2 HCAs totals $64 million. And that $64 million, much of it is paid for in the future, when a dollar is worth much less than a dollar today. So they aren't paying for our sewers. It's like me dropping $1 in the take a penny, leave a penny at Dunkin's and telling everybody I bought you all coffee. Like, it doesn't make any sense. I'm wrapping it. All right. So if you want to know what they have to gain, think about what a 13% return looks like on a $5 to $10 billion project. And think about if you'd like to get a 13% return on your portfolio for 20 plus years. At Saved Houses, our goal, our common goal at the governor is to reduce environmental impact for our energy needs. But we can't achieve that by putting on green blinders and allowing local environmental destruction in the name of macro environmental gains. We're asking Governor Healy to go back and look at her approach from gas pipelines when she was AG and apply that to offshore wind now that she's governor. There's an opportunity. We're not going to hit 2030 anyways. Let's do it right. Saved Houses folks are here today. We're going to be here next year. Go to our website, savedhouses.org, or the Facebook. Get involved. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to call our sister group up, Barnstable Speaks. They're tremendous. They've been trying to save Craigville Beach from the fate Avangrid wants to impose upon them. Come on up, Bob Schulte.
Good afternoon. I stole a page from Megan. No slides for me. My name is Bob Schulte. I'm one of the 4 founding members of Barnstable Speaks. I'm joined by one of our other founders, Sandy Jones, up here in the front. I want to start by thanking Suzanne Connolly and Save Greater Dowses Beach for including Barnstable Speaks, for everyone that took the time to join us here today, but I'd particularly like to thank the terrific guest speakers we've had so far. My wife and I have been full-time residents of the Cape, specifically the village of Centerville, for coming up on 30 years. Our 2 children, now adults, grew up here, and spent many days playing with friends and family at Barnstable's beaches and lakes and working their summer jobs in Centerville and Osterville. Additionally, my wife's parents own a home in West Yarmouth, and several of her siblings own a home in West Yarmouth for many years. Our family has had a long and treasured relationship with the Cape, and my wife and I care very much about preserving what we believe is unique and special about the Cape and Barnstable for our children, our grandchildren, and for many generations to come. That's what was behind my decision to join several other like-minded Centerville residents to form Barnstable Speaks. Our group is an independent, community-supported grassroots organization formed in September 2023. We've been the people knocking on neighborhood doors, particularly Sandy, passing out flyers, mailing postcards, and sending emails regularly to our followers, informing them of the steps they can take to make sure their voices are heard. Our letter writing campaigns to the EFSB and others have been successful because of our followers, many of whom we know are here today. Barnstable Speaks represents not just Centerville, but the residents of all 7 villages in Barnstable, and we thank you for your support. Contrary to the unfounded accusations made in a letter to the editor of the Cape Cod Times this week, our group and its activities have been funded entirely by its founders, along with signs and stickers donated by a local Hyannis business. There has been no other money, dark or otherwise, supporting our group and its efforts. Barnstable Speaks was formed when a group of residents concerned with the potential harmful environmental and other effects of offshore wind came together to oppose Avangrid Renewables' proposed Park City Wind project, and in particular, its plans to land multiple high-voltage cables on Craigville Beach, to run those cables just 10 feet under the shallow Centerville River, then run those cables through the heart of our historic village Main Street, much of which is under the National Historic Register, and finally to build a large power substation containing 125,000 gallons of toxic dielectric fluids above the Cape's sole source aquifer, which is the source of the Cape's drinking water and up gradient from Lake Aquagat, one of the Cape's largest lakes. In addition to creating a greater awareness of and sharing factual information about the Park City Wind project, Barnstable Speaks counts as its most significant accomplishment the initiation of a successful petition for an open meeting of the citizens to discuss residents' questions and concerns about the proposed offshore wind projects in Barnstable. Once a date for the open meeting had been set, Barnstable Speaks worked with the town to successfully organize and publicize the meeting in less than 10 days. It was estimated that close to 700 residents attended the open meeting at Barnstable's High School Performing Arts Center, and another 750 plus watched the Zoom presentation remotely, either live or following the event. That means that over 1,500 people viewed and or participated in that event. This in a town where the bi-monthly town council meetings have typically attracted an audience of less than 50 people over the past several years. At the open meeting, a vast majority of the residents who attended or spoke either opposed or had significant concerns about the offshore wind projects landing on Barnstable's public beaches. One of the issues causing the most concerns among Barnstable residents is the proposed construction of what has been described as some of the largest electric substations in the state, if not the country, on top of Cape Cod's sole source aquifer. The Cape's sole source aquifer is unique because the Cape's residents live, work, and play directly on top of our drinking water source. To share more information about this extremely important topic, I'd like to introduce Cliff Carroll. Cliff grew up in Barnstable and is a lifelong resident of Cape Cod. He's the principal broker of the Carroll Company and Carroll Commercial. In 2003, Cliff was one of the founders of windstop.org and was a leader and closely involved for over 18 years in the fight to stop the industrialization of Nantucket Sound by Cape Wind. He has over 40 years of local Cape Cod real estate experience as a real estate banker, broker, and developer. Some of Cliff's projects in this community range from being a partner in the purchase and development of the Gosnell Treatment Center to the 21E tank removal and remediation of the Barnstable Post Office property. Cliff just completed 7 years serving on the Board of Finance Committee for the Housing Assistance Corp, and he is also the chair of membership for the Barnstable Bluecoats in support of the officers of the Barnstable Police Department. Cliff has been very generous in sharing his knowledge of the federal wind farm permitting process and his expertise regarding the growing threat of transformer substations to our sole source aquifer and drinking water well fields to both Barnstable Speaks and Greater Dowses Beach groups. I'd like to introduce Cliff Carroll.
Presentation won't show up in there until you're ready to go. Okay. So presentation, just like. This is my first, is this on? Yes, right there. Whereabouts? Or down there, just click on the. Okay, there we go. All right, great. All right. Okay. Hello, I don't think this is on. I didn't touch it. Is this okay? It is now. Okay, there we go. Okay, thank you very much. I'm sorry for that delay. This is my first PowerPoint I've ever done. My name is Cliff Carroll. I was actually involved, I formed a group to help fight Cape Wind back in 2003, but we were the little guys that we did things like do boat protests at Greenpeace. We had a protest out at the test tower. Megan, I have to talk to you after this because I'm the one that brought the British Ministry of Defense radar report to the United States. And I participated in the, I also participated in those Coast Guard hearings that nobody talks about that took place in Woods Hole. So you and I need to connect on that. The folks from Nantucket, I live in West Barnstable on a hill. And last night I look out and I see 5 blinking lights over 30 miles away. And that's those new turbines. So with that being said, I'm going to make this the fastest slideshow you've ever seen because I'm not going to mess with Suzanne, who I'm very grateful to. Okay, what we have here is we have Cape Cod has what's called a sole source aquifer. We basically have an underground ocean that supplies all our drinking water. Cape Cod Aquifer provides 100% of our drinking water. It doesn't have any town boundaries. It basically, there are 3 different aquifers that are what they call lenses that go to the Cape. But the main one that we're in here, and you can see the locus right in the middle, this is where they're going to be putting the transformer platforms. And that is called the Sagamore Lens, which goes all the way from the canal all the way down to Dennis, Harwich town line. I'm going to blow through these real quick, but again, just keep your eye on the middle of the map. This is a map, and this I got from BOEM. This wasn't even a public document. And what's going on here is very important to my talk. I'm only going to talk today about aquifer transformers and the onshore nightmare that the offshore wind is creating. What you have here is you have 3 different objects. On your right-hand side is kind of a teal square. That's the Park City Wind, which the EFSB just approved. The federal government pretty much drove it down our throat. We just discovered probably about 3 weeks before the EFSB approved this project that they told us for a while there's going to be about 60,000 gallons of oil in it. Then they told us there's going to be about 65. And then the EFSB hearing comes out, and about 3 days before that, they disclose there's going to be 125,000 gallons of transformer oil in that. And you'll see in a minute, this is in a well zone. In addition to that, there's 45,000 gallons of what's called SF6 gas. It's used to cool. EPA says that SF6 gas is one of the deadliest carbon monoxide or atmospheric poisoning gases known to the EPA. It is 23,500 times more damaging to the atmosphere than CO2. And once it's released, it stays in the atmosphere for 3,500 years. They're using that. They never talk about it. The middle yellow blue, that's Eversource, by the way. Everybody keeps talking about Avangrid. We got to keep an eye on Eversource. They're kind of partnered up and they're all working behind the scene. This is going to be pretty much the doubling of the size of an existing transformer at Oak Street. They're taking it from about 25,000 gallons up to about 70,000 gallons. And as Adam said, they're increasing the voltage from 345 kilovolts to 115 kilovolts. The large blue object on the left here is one of what was one of their best kept secrets, and it's about to become one of their worst kept secrets.
That's a 28-acre transformer substation site that they have under agreement with an option to purchase. They've never disclosed it publicly. They've been running through the BOEM, which is the federal side of the process now, for looks like about 2 years without really coming into town discussing it. Anybody that's from here in the Cape area is familiar with the Kmart Plaza. That's about 26 acres. This site is 28 acres, and it's right where the fire tower is on the side of the Mid-Cape Highway and one of the highest points of land on the Cape. Let me just move on. All these red lines indicate well zones, well protection zones, aquifer protection zones. The black squares that I've drawn, they're approximate, but they're pretty accurate. To the right, you have the Park City substation, 125,000 gallons. The middle one is going up to about 70,000 gallons that we're aware of. And then that big black one with the little dot signifies the fire tower. That's 28 acres. If you go to scale with that particular, looking at the ones they have disclosed, there's probably going to be 150 to 200,000 gallons of oil on that. The best part of it is if you look to the upper left-hand corner, you can see kind of a different green. That's called the Bridge Creek Conservation Area. And I'm going to get to that in a minute. Big problem that we have. Transformers overheat, they ignite, they explode. Back in June in Sydney, Australia, there was a transformer substation that caught on fire. 60 firefighters reported to it. They were not allowed to go anywhere near the site. That fire burned for 3 days. The transformers at Oak Street, again, contain just short of 70,000 gallons over our sole source aquifer, 125,000 gallons over the Clay Hill transformer, and maybe 150,000 to 200,000 gallons that's going to be estimated at the fire tower. These are all, for anybody that's not familiar with it, they're all within about 1 mile. They're at the top of that aquifer at the highest point. Now I'm really going to fly through these slides. This is the transformer. This is another transformer. This isn't even the Australian one. Just for an idea and cleanup, and I'm just putting this in as a note. This is an oil tank that I took out of a piece of property a couple of years ago. This is the Barnstable Post Office down on Route 6A in Barnstable Village. In the middle of buying that property, what it turned out is there was a gas station there in 1915 that was torn down, and then this building got built. Nobody remembered the gas station. So when we did the underground radar on it, I found what looked like a submarine on the radar at the front door of the post office. That little cleanup that you see right there turned into a 9-month cleanup and almost $250,000 just for that little spot. This is the floor plan, or basically the plan for the transformer substation. It's going to be located at the Knights Inn Motel on the edge of Wequacket Lake, in the middle of one of those aquifer protection and well zones I showed you. These pieces of machinery right here are what contains 125,000 gallons of oil in the SF6 gas. This is an aerial drone shot. That hotel that you see in the bottom of the picture, that's only half of the site. They're purchasing that hotel. They're turning that into a 10-acre transformer substation. It's going to go all the way down to the wires that you see down below there. Again, right dead center in our aquifer protection zone on the edge of Wequacket Lake. This is the Oak Street substation. They're in the middle of doubling to tripling it. Again, one of the highest points of land in between the two substation sites. You can see the Centerville water tower there that supplies most of the water, Wequacket Lake in the distance. This is the Clay Hill fire tower that a lot of you see when you drive up the Mid-Cape Highway coming from Burger King. All that land in the back, 28 acres. Again, this site is larger than the Kmart Plaza, the whole plaza. Estimated between 100 and 200,000 gallons. Now, what's important about this is up to your left-hand side again. The town of Barnstable did a study about 2 years ago. And what ended up happening, this is a document, let me just go back to that. This is a document from the West Barnstable Water Commissioners, and again, I'll make this very quick. This is really important. Here it is. There we go. They had to do a study because back in 2019, the town of Hyannis, the village of Hyannis, was running 1.87 million gallons per day short on their well water. They had to shut wells off because of the fire school and the contaminants of the PFAS. And they estimated in the same report that by 2040, if the town doesn't find new sources of water, they're going to be 3.23 million gallons per day short on supplying water. If I go to the bottom of this where it's bolded, they went through 9 different sites, 7 different sites, 9 different wells. The conclusion was sites were evaluated and ranked based on pump yield, water quality. The Bridge Street Conservation Area, which is that spot up on the left, which is only a half a mile from this 28-acre substation, was 10 times greater than any other site on the yield. This is the substation here that we were talking about off of the backside of Martha's Vineyard. This substation is 590 feet tall, contains almost 157,000 gallons of oil. Federal government requires that the developer do an oil spill fatality chart. It's a federal regulation. This is the cover. It's 179 pages. They made them map what direction the oil is going to go in, and depending on what time of the year and the wind direction. Then the next thing they did, probability that the oil is going to reach land masses. As you can see here, the green line that runs along the edge of the Cape surrounds Martha's Vineyard, surrounds Nantucket. That's the probability and the spots that will get hit in that particular time of year. And it also goes all the way down to Block Island. A quick quiz, and I'll answer it so I don't get shot. Who is protecting our sole source aquifer, public water supply, from the risks presented by the hundreds of thousands of gallons of wind farm transform oil? The answer is not the EPA. The EPA is refusing to do water studies. They're refusing to enforce the Clean Waters Act. They're refusing to do the Sole Source Aquifer Act. And they're claiming that this project, because the project is not receiving federal funding. Boom, they're not doing it. They required the oil spill mapping. On the federal side, they do not require cover us on the state side. Massachusetts DEP, they also have refused to enforce protection of sole source aquifer. In fact, Avangrid's vice president of development is the former commissioner of the Massachusetts DEP. Not Cape Cod Commission, they also refused the call to map out the well fields or evaluate the contamination, so they're not protecting us. Not the Cape Cod delegation, with the exception of the incredible efforts of State Rep Steve Zaros. Every other rep, to my knowledge, is supporting this project. There were letters written in to the EFSB, and what ended up happening, and this is the last slide, by the way, none of the Cape Cod delegation of state reps or senators have responded to calls to request that the EPA, the DEP mapping of the growing risks these transformers present to the aquifer. They supported the Energy Facility Siting Board, overriding the town of Barnstable's objections on bonding to protect ourselves, which now there's no federal bonding on decommissioning. Now we have no bonding as a town. Zoning, building a transformer in residential zoning, and the request for intervenor status, so that they basically reduced the town of Barnstable to the power of one individual. As Peter Hansen, who's his 18th year as water commissioner for Comm District, constantly asks, where is the outrage? And last slide. We only have one sole source aquifer. It is not renewable. Thank you for listening.
Oh, you're gonna use Cliff's computer? Okay. So next we have physicians who care and are very worried about this a huge crowd of guys up here. Okay. So we have two physicians who are very worried about human health and safety. I'll just remind people that if Avangrid, I like to talk with the future conditional tense of the verb. I don't like to say these will, I like to say these would, because we still are determined to stop it. And if Avangrid has its way, it would put 2,800 megawatts of electricity beneath our residential streets in our business districts, in our neighborhoods, and 3 massive new substations on top of the aquifer. So just putting things in perspective. And Dr. Peters and Dr. Conway, right?
In the interest of time, I'll get going even before I just have a couple pictures to bring up, but I am Gary Peters. I'm an orthopedic surgeon. Prior to moving down to the Cape 2 years ago, I was in practice for 39 years at UMass Medical Center in Worcester. I was an assistant professor of orthopedics and a member of the trauma center, the level 1 trauma center at UMass Memorial. With that as background, I'd like to address a couple of the health and safety issues that we're concerned about. As a little plug for our beloved Dowses Beach, can we bring that up? Okay. We're actually trying to bring up the same picture that's at the back of the hall. Dowses Beach is a peninsula surrounded on 3 sides. You can see the beach obviously to the left, sand dunes, and then a large parking lot. What makes things even more complicated, and I have another view of the causeway that I'll bring up, but in the background, you can see that the only access to Dowses Beach is by way of a narrow causeway that runs between Finney's Bay and East Bay. That makes Dowses a potential disaster waiting to happen. Although the cables will run, three large cables would run approximately 30 to 40 feet beneath the beach and beneath the dunes, but then they need to come up into the parking lot, and they would be located about 5 feet below the asphalt of the parking lot. There would be 3 vaults giving Avangrid access to those cables. If a fire, well, and I should start. Cliff did a good job of explaining this, reviewing this. There are over 600 accidents per year in the United States related to fires or explosions involving electrical cables. So we're not talking about something rare. If an explosion were to occur in that parking lot, it could be catastrophic. How can I get my next slide up here? This is a view from the other end of the beach. This is the causeway with water on either side. It's a narrow two-lane road. It is the only access to the beach. If a fire or explosion were to occur and blocked access to that causeway, first responders may be unable to get to casualties on the beach and the parking lot for any length of time. That is it's a perfect storm waiting to happen. The second issue that I'd like to discuss, and Dr. Conway will be following me with more detailed information regarding EMF. But let me give you a very quick physics lesson. EMF, electromagnetic fields, is a term that describes 2 components: electrical fields and magnetic fields. Avangrid likes to boast about how their cables that are located 5 feet below the parking lot and the 6 miles of roadways between the parking lot and the substations. They like to tell us that there's no risk with EMF because the cables are going to be encased in concrete vaults, And then you're also going to have 5 feet of dirt and asphalt above them. Electrical fields are well shielded by those materials. However, magnetic fields, which continue to be a health concern, are not shielded by any physical materials. That means that anybody at the beach, anybody walking along our 6 miles to the substations will be only 5 feet from the magnetic waves generated by those cables. All the studies in the United States related to EMF risks have been in regard to overhead cables, which are located 40, 50, 60 feet overhead. Radiation risks are related to distance. Being located 5 feet from people walking along the parking lot and beach is a far cry from what happens with electrical cables 40 or 50 feet overhead. Finally, perhaps the greatest risk to the Cape is what could happen to the sole source aquifer, because that would affect virtually everybody on Cape Cod. And that, I believe, is what makes this project most unacceptable. As a quick discussion of risk, in the medical world, we talk about risk as having 2 components. Number one is, what's the likelihood or probability of something adverse happening? And Avangrid has reassured us that those risks are very low because of their mitigation efforts. However, the other component of risk that Avangrid cannot control is, what's the magnitude of the event if it does occur? With what could happen to the aquifer, the catastrophic effect is so great that it outweighs any mitigation efforts that Avangrid can propose. And because of that, we feel that this is an unacceptable risk. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Can you all hear me? Is that okay? My name is Dr. Joseph Conway. I'm an obstetrician, gynecologist. I've lived in Centerville and Ostville for the last 45 years. I have been chief of staff at Cape Cod Hospital, and I've served on the board of directors of Cape Cod Healthcare. I've delivered about 6,000 of our best citizens here on the Cape. I am a concerned citizen who feels we have an obligation to protect and preserve the fragile land, beaches, and waters of Massachusetts' leading tourist and economic diamond. Our health, safety, and protection of our drinking water is at risk. Whether you believe in the obsolete wind farm technology or not, the convenient landing place for a foreign company's money-making project backed by the country of Qatar is clearly the wrong place and wrought with dangers to our environment, our beaches and bays, our drinking water, our villages, businesses, and health. I wish to address 3 aspects and concerns of these projects. First, the concerns of generated electromagnetic fields of these high to extra high voltage transmission cables as they are rated. Secondly, the dangers to our sole source aquifer, which provides, again, as you've heard, 1,000% or 100% of our Upper Cape's drinking water. And finally, the dangers of the cables themselves and their thermal effects, both on the seabed environment and to the sole source aquifer over which these cables are proposed to pass. This could lead to increasing the temperature of the aquifer and subsequently increasing bacterial counts and increased gastrointestinal diseases. The devil is in the details when it comes to the impact of these construction projects. The proponents have not produced any scientific independent studies to allay our concerns of the dangers or disruptions to our community and environment. They have not presented any plans for continued future monitoring, nor their plans to mitigate problems that are discovered. Electromagnetic fields are produced by the flow of electrons through these transmission cables. The strength of the electromagnetic fields are proportional to the amount of electrical current passing through the power line, and exposure is proportional, as we've said, to the distance from the cables. The International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection guidelines point out that power lines are similar voltage to those of the wind farm. They produce approximately 10,000 to 100,000 greater exposure than a cell phone or a microwave. These are not comparable items. These effects have been shown by Gauss meters to be above acceptable values of 0.5 Gauss within 100 yards of the source. A transmission cable of which is proposed up to 765 kilovolts can produce 10 kilovolts per meter, much, much greater than what is acceptable. The World Health Organization of the United Nations classifies electromagnetic fields of radiation as possible carcinogenic to humans on limited evidence, but showing association with childhood leukemia from a study in Colorado. Continued research is ongoing in this field. There is also a superficial link to glioma brain tumors. Microwaves and radios produce waves that are dissimilar frequency and amplitude. Please, Avangrid, stop telling us that they are comparable. Other studies have shown a 4.4 times greater chance of infertility for women living within 500 meters of a 63 to 400 kilovolt cables. The proposed cables, as we know, are 220 to 275 kilovolts each. Prematurity and low birth weights have also been noted. Cataracts have increased in chronically exposed workers. The Mass Department of Public Health Radiation Control Division should be asked to render a safety statement on the proximity of these cables 5 feet below the surface to our health. They are not, as just stated, 50 feet in the air. The second area of concern is our drinking water preservation. I will review the location and structure of our sole source, which actually has already been done, for over half of the Cape's residents. The major aquifer, by far of the 6 that exists on the Cape, can easily be disrupted and contaminated by the trenching for these 6 landing cables and proposed 12 connection cables. The Cape aquifers provide 100% of our drinking water. The major and largest aquifer is the Sagamore lens of the upper half of the Cape Cod, as we've just been shown. The highly permeable land of the Cape keeps these aquifers recharged, but also makes it highly susceptible to contamination. Our aquifer is recharged solely by our rainfall. The aquifer is described as a lens, and in fact, it is shaped like a lens. It's quite thin at the edges, which are the boundaries of Cape Cod Bay and Nantucket Sound. It also extends under the shoreline and beyond the shoreline and lies only 10 to 20 feet beneath the seabed. The aquifer at its center, which is in the mid-Cape elevated area of the Cape, is deeper in shape and above sea level, which is surprising. It has an upper freshwater layer and a lower saltwater layer. These are in equilibrium, and there is a diffusion layer of the salt at the thin edges of the lens at the southern and northern beaches. Thus, there is a great danger to puncture the aquifer and allow intrusion of more salt water into the aquifer with the horizontal drilling, which is done for out to about 1,000 yards from the beach. The drilling is approximately 30 feet below the seabed and rises to about 10 feet under the beach. This creates a huge danger for intrusion into the aquifer, not to mention the 230,000 volts of electricity 10 to 15 feet beneath your grandchildren who are building sandcastles. Perhaps we will tan faster this summer. This choice of landfall for these cables is crazy and totally illogical. Intrusion into the aquifer would decrease the fresh water available, raise the sodium levels, and raise the chlorine levels. It will also raise acidity, iron, manganese, and hydrogen sulfide. I highly suspect that the transitional zone of the aquifer was pierced at Covell's Beach, as pictures of in the production and construction clearly show the many, many pumps they had to use to keep water out of the exit points of the cables, which are up into the parking lot and the splicing boxes beneath the parking lot. Also, the routes proposed for the cables will transect two zones, which are a one wellhead protection area, as well as two extended incursions into the very large Zone 2 wellhead protection areas. Other projected routes transect one Zone 1 and two Zone 2 areas, which have sort of been shown to us already. Contamination through our unconsolidated, highly permeable land of Cape Cod by dielectric cooling fluids, hydraulic fluids, diesel fluids, gasoline, and oil would be catastrophic, as we've said. We have no alternatives available for drinking water. Plymouth County does not have the capacity to supply the Cape, nor does it have the means by any pipelines to help us if there's any disasters. We have no desalination plants that are up and running for backup protection, and desalination is extremely expensive. Perhaps Avangrid should be building 2 or 3 desalination plants rather than electrical substations to guarantee our drinking water. Finally, I will discuss the dangers of temperature increases to both the seabed and the land from these high voltage cables. I will cite the proven references, not imagined, non-proven wishful thinking of Avangrid. In an August 2016 Geophysical Journal International studied the temperature effects of high voltage transmission cables in sedimentary environments, exactly what the Cape is made up of. This was done at the University of Southampton in the UK. In the study, heat flow regimes and radial temperature distributions were assessed. Surface temperatures of the cables, as was somewhat mentioned, rise to 170 degrees Fahrenheit. And this is for a distance of greater than a meter were found when these cables are in operation. Significant implications were found for chemical and physical processes, biological changes, and operational performance of the cables themselves. Heat transport would have significant implications on the seabed microfauna and the cable current ratings as well. Little is known of the thermal regimes they will generate when operating. Heat loss was found to be both by conduction and at higher temperatures, which these are, by convection. As several marine organisms are extremely sensitive to minor ambient temperature changes, any such temperature increases in the surrounding sediment may cause significant impacts and displacement of living organisms dwelling near these surface environments. There is also potential for geochemical changes as well. So say goodbye to shellfish and lobsters. Cables laid in terrestrial environments are much different from seabed marine cables and their ability to carry current. Calculations are not comparable, as Avangrid keeps claiming. In low permeability cable surrounds, heat transfer is at least 40 centimeters, and at high temperatures are achieved, it changes to convection heating, which then can extend as far as 5 feet from the cables. In high permeability seabed areas, heat effects extend up to 5 feet. Study commented that the operating temperatures of the typical submarine cables in its current flow easily exceeds the German Federal Maritime and Hydrographic Agency's guidelines, which was referred to earlier. Okay. This allows production of no higher than 36 degrees Fahrenheit, approximately 20 centimeters from the cables. This is much, much lower than what is produced by the Vineyard Wind and other proposed cable voltages. Again, we have no documented testing from Avigrid. The study went on to say that temperature change is an important and long recognized environmental factor in the ecosystems of the benthic biota. These thermal increases can impact evolutionary, physiological, and behavioral responses, as well as impact their geographical distributions. Excessive sediment temperatures can initiate significant seabed changes, exposing cables and possible changes to the cables themselves, fishing, and watercraft. In addition to thermal effects to the sea environment, we then move to the thermal effects on land, and more specifically, the cable thermal effects only a few feet from our sole aquifer. In December 7th, 2023, New England Journal of Medicine, a very timely study from Yale University delineated the tremendous effects of just a 1 to 3 degree change in the source of our drinking water. Certain bacteria, namely Shigella, Salmonella, Legionnaire's disease, Giardia, and certain viral and protozoan species are very sensitive to thermal changes. Most of these organisms can cause severe gastrointestinal disease. Placing these cables over any water source, especially anywhere that has only a sole source aquifer, is madness. Are we ready to handle additional water purification, greater chlorination? Who will be able to handle increased monitoring, and who will pay for it? In summary, I've discussed the three problems with landing these high voltage cables on the beaches and routing them 5 feet beneath the surface in residential areas and above our aquifer. First, the dangers of very strong electromagnetic fields for which there are no plans for monitoring, let alone the known possible effects. 2, the fragile sole source aquifer on which we all depend and which we must vigorously and diligently guard and preserve. And lastly, the thermal effects both to the seabed and on the land. There is little data and again, no plan for monitoring and guarding the environment and the effects on our drinking water and therefore our health. So thank you for your attention.
It's hard to pull someone off the stage who ushered 6,000 people into this world. But Dr. Conway, that was terrific. Thank you so much. I just asked him for a copy of his presentation because he's brought a lot of new things to my attention. And I was looking at it. I happen to have a schematic of the duck banks. They are only 10 inches above the water mains. That's the plan, 10 inches above the water mains. Each one of these cables produces up to 190 degrees Fahrenheit of heat. In the wintertime, you turn on your water in Barnstable, it's ice cold. That's the effect of the air and the ground being cold. What's going to happen to those water mains once these things aren't going in? How's that? We have 2 more speakers, so I ask for your patience and attention because we have wonderful people coming from Virginia Beach. They're the last, and they're being very patient on Zoom. But right now, we have our friends in Falmouth from the Falmouth from Falmouth Mara Vista Heights Neighborhood Association, Mr. Dave Buzanowski. He's going to have a few words about their fight down in Falmouth against South Coast Wind. Dave, you want to come up? South Coast Wind used to be called Mayflower Wind, and then they discovered there are no pilgrims in Falmouth. So
I'm going to start because
Keep it on.
I'm going to start because I'm going to I'm very impressed with the speakers prior. They've all said a lot of what I was already going to say. So Suzanne, you're going to be happy. Firstly, I want to thank the Greater Dowses Beach Association, Save Greater Dowses Beach, for arranging this summit, and Suzanne Conley in particular for an incredible amount of work you put into arranging this. Yeah, if we could just open the I'm here with a fellow colleague, officer of the Falmouth Heights Association, Greg Mazmanian. We represent approximately 500 members association. And we're here in support and solidarity with the Save Dowses Beach as well as the Craigville Beach people. We're facing very similar situation, and we stand in opposition to these wind developers bringing their cables under our beaches, parks, and streets, and through our respective communities. As Suzanne mentioned, it's South Coast Wind, which was previously Mayflower, and they're going to bring 1,200 megawatts, approximately 250 volts cables through our neighborhood under our south-facing Falmouth Heights Beach. And as you know, all the south-facing beaches this month already have been pretty devastated by the erosion, and our beach is no exception. I'm going to put on my reading glasses. Our mission statement as an association, and it's very specific, is to preserve and improve the residential character of Falmouth Heights and Mara Vista neighborhoods, and to protect and enhance our beaches, parks, estuaries, and public spaces. And this is specifically addressing exactly what we're facing here. A brief history of Falmouth Heights. Falmouth Heights was one of the first planned resort communities in the United States. In 1870, just 5 years after the Civil War, a group of 5 men from Worcester, returning on a trip from Martha's Vineyard, came up with the idea to develop a similar resort type of community and purchased the land, attractive land between Deacon's Pond, which in 1907 was opened to become Falmouth Inner Harbor, and Little Pond to the east. They sold lots over the years, and the summer cottages were built. And after a number of ebbs and flows in the economy and real estate markets, and the departure and deaths of some of the partners, one widow, Elvira Goodwin, remained with title to the avenues and 6 parks in Falmouth Heights. In 1903, Mrs. Goodwin gifted these avenues and parks to the town of Falmouth with the strict forward-thinking covenant that no building or other obstruction shall be placed upon any of the named avenues and parks, but they shall always remain kept open for the public use and for the purpose of avenues and parks. It should be noted here that the avenues and parks targeted by South Coast Wind, as referred to as preferred and alternative sites, are specifically mentioned by name in the above deed. Fast forward to 2020. I don't know if you can see. Do I have a mouse? I've got a pad here. So I believe that's it right there. It's approximate. That's approximately where the cables are going to come ashore and cross Falmouth Heights Beach. And they're going to go directly north into what is Worcester Park, which is one of the deeded parks. And it's hard to believe we've already been working on this for 4 years. Mayflower Wind, now South Coast, approached Falmouth in the end of 2019 to do soil testing for the purpose of testing whether the possibility of onboarding their cables in our town. The Falmouth Conservation Committee approved the testing at several sites on the recommendation of staff. And I'm not sure what that actually means. The select board then agreed to allow them with the understanding that this is without a commitment on the town's part. Then, prior to reaching any agreement with the town, Mayflower submitted their entire application to the state, naming 2 sites as preferred and alternative, both are which are within Falmouth Heights, namely Worcester Park and Central Park. As the details of the project emerged, through more research than disclosure, it became clear that Mayflower, now South Coast, intentions all along was to onboard their 1,200 megawatt cables in Falmouth Heights. That project, it would be, again, like both Craigville and Dowses, as well as Covels, is to directionally drill under the Heights Beach. The work is said to be done during the off season, and I'm really hard pressed to come up with what an off season for a residential community on the Cape is. They would then use the Heights Beach parking lot for staging and storage of equipment. So in the off season, which I think they designate as something of October to April or something of that nature, that parking lot is basically used for people that do enjoy the beach in the winter, and also for some of our local restaurants, particularly Shipwrecked. They use that parking lot all winter long, and they're going to be hard pressed business wise if that's now not available to them. The cables would then come to transition vaults. Now this is something I really enjoy. Transition vaults, 1 vault for each cable. Each vault is 60 feet long by 12 feet wide by 9 feet high. And these are going to be buried under the first block of Worcester Court Park. Did anyone note the construction that went on at Covels Beach by any chance when this was installed? We've got a series of drone pictures here. How can I get to them? Where's my audio visual guy? How can I get to the next one? Oh, there you go. All right. So there's a series of pictures here. We had actually hired a drone to see what we were facing if this were to come to our town, and you can see. In this case, I believe it's the beach is to the left there. Again, to the left. This is not an insignificant project. The directional drilling devices are in place there. The storage of pipe, that's the entire parking lot. It's just completely occupied by equipment. And I really can't imagine that being in our boulevard type of park with houses on both sides of it. And from the transition vaults, they would then go into a duct bank, as has been described prior, which would run the length of Worcester Park, south to north, which is about 4/10 of a mile. In doing so, the duct bank would require a trench 25 feet in width and requiring mature trees to be removed and unable to be replanted over or adjacent to the duct bank. South Coast has told us that they'd return the park to as good, if not better condition. And I kind of find that to be kind of perfuming the goat, but we're still going to have the 1,200 megawatt cables under our park. I've raised the issue of the heat of the cables, coincidentally at the Avangrid meeting with Dowses at one point in time, I believe last year, and the engineer on staff, so to speak, was unable to answer the questions when I asked him the core temperatures of the cables. And I pressed him on it, and I said, wait, you're the engineer and you don't know? And I pressed him, and he hemmed and hawed, and one of the guys from Avangrid came over and kind of took me by the arm and said, let's drop it, send me an email and I'll respond to you. Well, they did respond at your next meeting, if I'm not mistaken, and he did confirm that the core temperatures are rated for 90 degrees centigrade, which is 194 degrees Fahrenheit, but they have a maximum of 105 centigrade, which is 221 degrees Fahrenheit. And the doctor very much addressed a lot of what I was going to say about much more than I was going to say. Then once the duck bank leaves the park, it's going to go into our narrow streets with utility loaded streets, progressing at 100 to 200 miles, 200 feet per day, past small businesses, banks, hotels, an inn, pharmacies, schools, stores, and residences, to a substation, a 1,200 megawatt substation. The first being the first alternative being only 3.5 miles away, a relatively short distance compared to the second, and the second being eight miles away. The substation would require a AC to DC converter because from the wind farm offshore, the AC generated by the turbine is being converted at a substation platform to DC, transmitted via DC, and then once it gets to the substation, it has to be converted back to AC again. That brings us around to our substation then. The substations described previously are very similar to what we're going to be facing with the amount of dielectric fluid, which is shocking to me to find out how much it's going to be, and I only learned about that recently. In the converter station, or the converter facility, to convert from AC back to DC back to AC, it requires a lot of energy in itself, and it has to be cooled. And in addition to that, it's very loud. Where they intend to place this second alternative substation is in an aggregate lot off of Thomas Landers Road in northern Falmouth. And one of my close friends actually owns a perfect, pristine piece of property adjacent to it, with his own pond and 20 plus acres, et cetera, et cetera. And this is now going to be living next to him on a permanent basis. The issue of the dielectrics, the wind developer had told us at one point in time and said, well, that's why we're building a berm, all around the substation. And, well, why does it have to be 25 feet high? And well, one of the guys said, one of our advocates, if you will, was supporting us, got up to speak at one of our public meetings we had with the town. And they said, well, have you ever seen a 1,200 or a 300,000 volt transformer explode? You want that berm between you and that explosion. And all the dielectric fluid and whatnot would be distributed if not a large fire. As an association, similar to what Dowses Beach has done, we polled our membership, and we do not oppose, we have not taken a position to oppose offshore wind. Or sorry, let me even clarify that even more. We've taken a position not to oppose wind-generated clean energy. We are adamantly opposed to the 1,200 megawatt cables going under our beach, park, and streets. The more we've learned about the details of the way they want to generate the offshore wind, and most of which was described today with some incredible detail, there's a lot of us that honestly oppose this as individuals. As a group, I don't think we can get them. The more we've learned, if we had taken another poll right now, I think with what we've learned over the course of the past 4 years, I think many of them would also oppose. You're hooking me.
Bring 6,000 people into the world.
No, I didn't. Not going to go there. Not going to go there. So let me just quickly say, Article 97 of the Massachusetts State Constitution is one of our biggest assets, if you will. Article 97, I don't know how many people are familiar with the wording of it. It's relatively short, Suzanne. It's a protection for we, the people of the Commonwealth. It establishes a right to a clean environment, including its natural and scenic, historical, and aesthetic qualities for the citizens of the Commonwealth. It also declares the conservation of resources as a public purpose, and provides that land or easements subject to Article 97 shall not be used for other purposes or disposal without 2/3 roll call vote of the legislature. I think that's critical, and it's one of our sole protections, if you will. Our opponents have not hesitated to resort to name calling and virtue signaling. One in particular that gets to me is the hypocrisy of an opponent who doesn't live anywhere near our potentially negative impacted community, calling us NIMBY. I certainly don't see any of them stepping forward and suggesting that such cables be placed in their neighborhoods. I would clarify that by saying, not in our front yards. I would clarify it by saying, not under our beaches either, nor our parks, and nor our streets. And lastly, I want to thank Suzanne Conley again for being a wonderful, powerful dynamo. She's absolutely incredible and has done a magnificent job. Ed Lambert, I don't know if he's still here. No, I'm sorry. I want to thank him to help us get our message out. And with respect to Mr. Krakoff, the article in the Times recently, like the other villages, I'd like to declare that for this citizen group that you profess to know something about, we have no connection to any entangled web of anti-clean energy agenda and to kill offshore power. And we've never received a penny from any coal or oil gas company. Our members have funded everything, period. And tiny turbines, he said in that article, a turbine the size of the Empire State Building and 150 of them just in our wind farm. I'm sorry, Mr. Krakoff. Thank you very much.
We have friends in Virginia Beach who have been fighting Avangrid down there. We have Joe Bourne on Facebook. How do we get Facebook up? Did we? They're working on it. But we had a great meeting with Joe Bourne down there at Sandbridge. They're trying to save their Sandbridge Beach. And they've done a great job scaring Avangrid off, sort of. And they're doing what we are doing here in Barnstable, which is to say, no, you can't tell us what we're going to do in our own town. I checked with him a couple of times, Reese. He said he was still on. Oh, there he is. I see his name. Joe, you're muted. Your video's off. Is he seeing this? You are, yeah. So Cape Codders, please stay patient and welcome our friends from Virginia Beach. They're really great people. Oh, yeah, yeah. He's on. I wrote to him a few times to make sure he was still on the Zoom call. And he's going to share his screen to show what he has if we get him going. I also, we mentioned briefly SF gas, FS6, which is dielectric gas, is also part of the planned construction in these substations. If SF6 gas is 25,000 times more potent to the environment, to the air than CO2, and if it escapes its enclosure, which can happen during lightning strikes or a rusting or even a high windstorm, it will suck the oxygen right out of people's lungs. It's growing as a greenhouse gas because of the electrification of our world. And they plan to use many, many thousands of pounds of it in each of the substations here in Barnstable and probably in Falmouth too, and all future substations. So that's another one of our concerns. I just uncovered as well data showing how much air pollution during construction and operations and maintenance will happen because of these projects. And I encourage you to look at our Facebook page, Save Greater Deuces Beach, where that data is available. So it's not just water pollution and destruction of environment, it's air pollution as well. No luck, Reese? Is he there? Okay, he unmuted himself. He did. Mr. Sagamore? Oh, I get it. I get it. Was that Tom? Yeah, your stand-up routine is over, Tom. I'd like to thank all of the folks who came out here to help us today too. I don't want to say names because I'm sure I will forget someone, but thank you to all of you did check in and helped people. I don't think this is gonna happen, huh? Yeah. No, he's on. He would have told me if he's off. Yeah. What do you mean they're asking to mute? See, Reese has taken over my Zoom account, so I can't do it from here. Here we go. Yay, Kitty Hawk. We've got it. We've got it. This is Joe Bourne. Joe, we can't see your face, but we can see your PowerPoint presentation. This is the Kitty Hawk project. And they plan to put their cables in this beautiful beach that's very similar to Douse's Beach. Hit it. I know judges can unmute and mute people. I didn't know that I could mute people. That's a good thing to know. Joe, you have to unmute yourself. Sorry about this, folks. I wonder if there's a quick question while we're waiting for Joe to come on. Yes. Oh, God. So they plan to put 88 turbines up for the Commonwealth Wind Project, and that would equal 1,200 megawatts. Well, that's the nameplate. Yes, that's the nameplate. But what happens is they call it, like at full capacity, it's 1,200 megawatts. What they say is that most of the time it's going to be 600 megawatts. But on the other hand, they say it's going to power, 100 million homes. Yeah, exactly, for 27 seconds. And is that at full power or half power? It all depends on how the wind is blowing. But when the wind is really blowing hard and all the turbines are moving, they can energize those lines to 1,200 megawatts. That's correct. you'll have to like, yeah, sure. I don't want to waste the time. I don't know if this is going to actually happen, but this is my colleague Hector Gunther who wanted to make a brief comment. And if Joe comes on, you'll have to. I'll rip the microphone away.
Can you hear me? So we've heard a lot about the risks of offshore to the offshore of offshore wind and to the onshore. I'm just going to add a little bit of a wonky what if scenario. So my background is I worked in investment banking in New York for 30 years. And it's important to realize how each of these projects is being configured. So the three projects that Avangrid wants to put on land on Cape Cod, on Barnstable beaches, including the turbines offshore. Each of these projects is being configured in a fourth tier limited liability company subsidiary, LLC. And they're designed for, this is a frequently used vehicle in North American construction and in large infrastructure projects. But the thing to know about these LLCs, if something goes wrong, if there's an environmental disaster or an economic disaster or a public health catastrophe, and American corporate history is replete with examples of this, the parent company, in this case, Avangrid Inc., which trades on the New York Stock Exchange, what they will do is they will put the subsidiary, this fourth tier LLC, into bankruptcy and then walk away. And if that happens, nobody has any recourse to the parent company, which has all the assets. Down in the subsidiaries, the only assets are the turbines, the onshore infrastructure, and the substations. And all of those are pledged to a group of banks who have senior secured claim on those assets. So the citizens of Barnstable, the town of Barnstable, the business owners of Barnstable will get in line as unsecured creditors trying to get whatever scraps are left after the lenders get whatever they can get, which isn't going to be a whole lot if there's a catastrophe. So that's an important thing to know. If something goes wrong, as Gary said, the probability isn't high, but the magnitude of something going wrong is huge. And if that does happen, we'll have very little or no protection. Yes.
We're seeing that other wind companies are pulling projects that are not economic projects. So the Vineyard Wind project gets built, let's say, and the economics don't work, and they decide that they just don't want to execute, they don't want to follow through. Would they do something similar? So if there's no reserve now, we talked about there's no waive, the government has waived its mandate to, reserve funds to decommission. Can they just walk away, claim bankruptcy, and go back to Spain and just call it a day and we're stuck with that?
So Amy asked the question, which was, if through ordinary course, the project proceeds and then at some point in the future, some of the turbines are knocked down or somehow the economics of the project are depleted, say 10 years in, can these LLC project subsidiaries just fold up their tents and walk away? And the answer is yes. Under American bankruptcy law, you can do that. So again, none of us will have any recourse, not that we'll want recourse at that point, but we won't have any recourse to try to make ourselves whole from whatever catastrophe has occurred. One other comment about Avangrid. So they're a public company. Their core business is regulated electric and gas utilities in 4 states, Maine, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and I believe New York. The offshore wind business is a startup business for them. They have never built or operated an offshore wind farm. The Covels project, Vineyard Wind 1, I guess it's called, that's the first one. That's just on the edge of perhaps starting operations. But this is a brand new business. This is like a high-risk venture for them. And where you have inexperienced operators and developers and builders, that's when construction accidents can occur. That's when operating accidents can occur. Now they say, oh, we're tapping into the expertise of our Spanish parent, Iberdrola, that owns 82% of the shares of Avangrid. But the fact is, Iberdrola is over in Spain, and these are Americans and largely contractors who are building these projects. And again, none of them has ever built one of these before. So there is enhanced risk from that score. Another thing I would just comment, and this is really a Barnstable issue, but perhaps a Falmouth issue as well. Barnstable, as Adam Myrick said, each of the projects is contractually obligated to pay roughly $32 million. Each of the first two projects, the Covels project and the Craigville project, is contractually obligated to pay the town of Barnstable $32 million over 25 years. And in the case of the Craigville project, almost half of that money comes at the end of year 25. So in today's dollars, a very, very small amount of money. But, you know, so these are kind of wonky legal financial aspects to the deals, but the risk return for the residents in the town of Barnstable is just way off. It's way off. It's vastly in favor of the developers. Sir. Right. Right. Yeah. So that the question, so this gentleman is raising a great question, which is the impact on property values. And I should have followed up my point. So $32 million over 25 years, but that's going to be offset by the diminution in property values for the houses that are along the line where the cables are interred into the streets. So what that means is over time, lower assessments, which translates into lower property tax revenues to the town. So again, Avangrid doesn't, this is one of the many risks that Avangrid doesn't talk about. There's a sheet in the back, a one-pager, and it's headed on offshore wind has onshore impacts. And this is one of the big issues. Cliff, did you have a question? Right. 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 Yeah, so Cliff Carroll's raising the question of how the company Avangrid Inc., the parent company, Ken Kimmel, has promised to make whole the businesses whose revenues have been greatly diminished through the construction and possibly after of the Covels project. And what we've discovered is none of the businesses that were impacted by the installation of the cables under Covels Beach and then through the town out to Independence Park for the substation, not one of them has received any kind of compensation from the company. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
He can use the microphone. There's a microphone. Johnny's just saying that his wife had a heart event and had a defibrillator implanted, right, John?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. And so she can't even buy a certain type of cell phone because it's too strong for her heart. How is she gonna, we go by Oak Street all the time. How are there gonna be danger signs there? Are there gonna be road maps?
So we heard that Eversource's answer to you, when you talked about that, I think it was you,
Yes.
was that they would be glad to drive around with you and find out where it would be safe for you to drive with her.
Yeah.
And I think that's correct, right?
Well, they obfuscated the whole question. They couldn't answer it.
Right. But they
So,
offered to drive around with you
yeah,
to see where it's safe.
The other thing, I wanted to ask the doctors, my wife can't even have an MRI.
Right.
With, you've got one magnetic field up on top of the hill. You're gonna have another one across the way by Craigville Hotel. There's two huge magnetic fields. What's somebody coming up down the Mid-Cape? Are they gonna have caution signs?
Let me follow up your example, which is an excellent one. We had a fellow stand up at one of their so-called open houses and say to the engineer, I have a pacemaker. Will it be safe for me to lie on the beach after these cables are installed? And the answer was, well, they make a new kind of pacemaker. So in other words, go get an upgrade.
Right.
So I think your situation, Johnny, and your wife's, and I'm sorry she had that happen, but this is an example of what happens when you inflict massive electrical infrastructure on a community. This community has the right to question and to really, I hate to say this, but just flat out oppose their plans to inflict all of this on Barnstable. As far as I'm concerned, I hope these lawsuits prevail. I hope these lawsuits prevail and they'll have to take those turbines down for Vineyard Wind. That's what I'm hoping. So, yeah, I got another person.
I would just hope that somebody can do research on this type of stuff because
We'll bring it up. We'll
yeah,
bring it up.
yeah.
And there's a lady who wants to ask a question.
Hi, I'm Dr. Emily McClure from Community Health Center. I'm also concerned about the medical aspects of this, including all my patients who have pain pumps. What happens if all of a sudden you get an electromagnetic whoosh and you get a great big discharge of your opiate because of a malfunction?
Right.
We're already having a fentanyl problem. What about having pain pumps malfunction?
Yep. Thank you for
All right,
saying
my
that.
other thought was we're all going to be having more electric cars. What is the possibility of driving over here and having a malfunction of your electric vehicle?
Well, if it's too cold, they won't charge anyway.
They won't charge anyway. But we do have warm months here too. What's going to happen to the electric vehicles?
Yeah, well, they're kind of sitting on the lots right now. They can't get rid of them, but that's a great point. Yeah, that's a great point. Town Councilor Kristen Turkelson. Yeah, and I'm really sorry. Yes, the whole summit has been recorded on Zoom, even this trouble we're having here with Joe Bourne. I really wish we could have gotten him on because he's fabulous. What's that? My phone's dead, and we already wrote to him and said, unshare your screen and unmute yourself, and it's not working, so. Yeah, what I'll do is I'll apologize profusely and ask him to please do his presentation and then add it to the link. What we're going to do is add the link to the summit, Close to the Wind Summit 1, because I can see Close to the Wind Summit 2 is going to be coming up next year. Is he there? No? All right.
Can you hear me now?
Joe.
Yes.
Oh, it's
Right.
Joe
What I
Bourne
did
from,
was, yeah,
from
sorry
Virginia
about that.
Beach.
Yeah, it would not let me unmute the presentation. I apologize, but I went through the phone line and just connected in. So I'm talking through the phone and trying to present through.
We're going to listen.
Through
Hey,
here.
Cape Cod, let's give him a round of applause. You hear that, Joe? All right.
Yes, that's great. Thank you. I apologize for the technical issue.
No, we're good.
So good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Joe.
Are we? All right. So good afternoon. My name's Joe Bourne. I'm here representing the Protect Sandbridge Beach Coalition. We're a group of concerned Virginia Beach citizens who've sought to educate ourselves and our community about Avangrid and their proposed Kitty Hawk offshore wind project. As we've learned more about this project, we've reached out to other stakeholders and decision makers at the local and state level. This includes a proactive outreach to civic leagues, HOAs, or private groups around the community. And I'd like to extend my thanks to Suzanne and to the Save Greater Dowses Beach group for allowing me to participate in today's summit. To start, I thought it'd be helpful to give you a high-level picture of the Kitty Hawk proposal. As you can see from the picture shown, the wind lease area for this project is approximately 25 miles east of the Outer Banks with a proposed offshore cable route that runs northwest into Sandbridge Beach, a community located in Virginia Beach, Virginia. This is a 3.5 gigawatt project, which makes it the largest single landfall in the U.S. and the largest that Avangrid has ever attempted. Landfall will include 6 offshore export cables being landed into 6 transition joint bays, as you know, each the size of a rail car. These cables are then split into 18 separate transmission lines. The onshore cables will run approximately 6 miles along the red route shown in the picture to the right, through Sandbridge, through the Back Bay National Wildlife Refuge, and then through surrounding communities until it terminates at a newly built substation in an area we call Corporate Landing. And while they claim that all the lines will be run underground, they've reserved the right to go above ground along the section bounded by the yellow arrows shown in that same picture. Avangrid does not propose to make landfall in some isolated area of Sandbridge, but in the heart of our community. There's one road into Sandbridge from the mainland. The main intersection is the hub of shopping, restaurants, public parking, fire and rescue, and is the singular access in and out of our community. It is essentially our community's front porch. Now, the major timeline of events for us is shown in this summary. In like fashion with so many of their other projects, Avangrid spent the first several years quietly courting city officials with no public engagement. But in 2022, public visibility began to take shape, primarily in the Sandbridge community. By the end of that year, we were told by most people we reached out to that this project was, and I quote, a done deal. At a February 2023 City Council meeting, Avangrid, with the support of the Virginia Beach Economic Development Group, made a push for the easement approvals that are needed to make landfall in Sandbridge. A strong community presence at that meeting gave City Council pause, and more formal public briefing was ordered. This briefing was held in May. Avangrid presented their case, and approximately 70 Virginia Beach residents spoke largely in opposition. The meeting ran for about 4 hours and ended with City Council advising Avangrid that they needed to more properly engage the public. In October and November, Avangrid made a final push by scheduling multiple public engagement forums in an effort to check the box and push City Council for a vote. Notably, none of these public sessions were held in any of the affected areas of the city. Later in November, City Council had apparently heard and seen enough, and they made a public statement of non-support for the Kitty Hawk project and advised Avangrid accordingly. Now, as of today, Avangrid is attempting to work around this decision at the state level. The city, along with affected communities, are mobilizing our efforts to fight them at the State House. So while our fight is not over, if you had asked us where we thought we would be just 12 months ago, we would have told you that the city was going to grant easement and this project would be moving forward at pace. What I'd like to spend the rest of my time on is sharing how we went from it's a done deal to no support over the course of the last year. As we get into this discussion, let me start by saying this has been a full community effort. People have written, called, and shown up. Presence matters, and we encouraged everyone to speak their mind, not from a script, but we took the position that presence alone would not carry the day. Our group took the responsibility to research all aspects of the project and educate ourselves, our communities, and our city leaders. To develop our strategy, we worked with a simple model depicted in this graphic and asked ourselves how we might best tip the debate in our favor. In any debate, you're looking for points of leverage. This picture led us to 3 basic tactics we tried to consistently employ. Add weight to our position, remove weight from their position, and win the credibility battle to shift that fulcrum to our advantage, adding to the leverage we needed to win. As we applied this model to our local situation, on the left of the scale, you see a sampling, just a sampling of the specific issues we've dealt with in the Virginia Beach area, alongside some of the opposition argument that has been made by Avangrid and their supporters. Below the bar, you see the credibility tug of war that's been going on to secure credibility with decision makers. In general, I would share 3 observations from this. First, local issues that will move decision makers tend to be unique for each community, and it takes some time to find the right issues and the right messaging around those issues to shape opinion. For purposes of today, I'm not going to dwell much on our local issues for just that reason. All I can say is that we are actively seeking to learn new things and new ways to frame our issues to keep our arguments on point on an almost daily basis. Second, the opposition themes seem to be more common in each community. This is the best alternative. These are the great economic benefits. Here are the environmental benefits and how it will impact climate change. And then lastly, the credibility tug of war also shares similarities when it comes to a specific developer, in our case, Avangrid. They play the same cards against you, and they carry the same weaknesses with them from place to place. So in my remaining time, I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about our response to the second and third points, since these are the areas of potentially shared interest. So let's first talk a little bit about removing weight from their position. We'll start with claimed economic benefits, and you all know the story. Billions of dollars, hundreds of jobs, a unicorn in every backyard. And while I could argue all afternoon about the fallacies in these promises, it was an argument we did not have the resources to win. Virginia Beach is part of a shared metropolitan area called Hampton Roads, which boasts the Norfolk Naval Shipyards. This is a major coastal asset that is keenly interested in supporting this offshore activity. The regional chambers of commerce, the state economic development boards, etc., were all in support. So rather than argue against those benefits, we took a different approach. We purposely separated the grid connection portion of the project from that benefit altogether. In doing this, we were able to put our number one concern, landfall and cable routing, in a different economic light, and it put the local risks into a much better perspective. We've routinely argued that grid connection has no bearing on the development of this proposed Hampton Roads offshore wind hub. And this is supported by a 2019 Virginia Department of Energy study on that specific topic. What we feel great satisfaction with right now is that when we started, this was not a consideration, and now we hear city council members saying exactly what we've been saying. Secondly, the environmental claims. Climate change will be eradicated, no more fossil fuels, the oceans will stop rising. This is the common argument again and again. And we could argue factually against that as well. The problem we face there is that environmental groups that would typically advocate for our position are conflicted, and they're rationalizing development risks they would never take otherwise. Basically, we get the feeling that they will not get to sit at the cool kids table at any of their climate seminars if they say anything that may hinder the rapid advance of renewable energy development. Our most recent approach, and honestly one that we're still trying to get the measure of, is to remove the guilt factor from decision makers. BOEM is on, as noted earlier, BOEM is on the record stating that all the offshore wind development the U.S. is pursuing will not move the needle on climate change at all, much less a single project. We are using this to let decision makers know they have time to get this right. Saying no to certain proposals will not end life as we know it. There is time to consider the best way to do things, not the fastest. Speed and urgency are not the same thing. Lastly, the claim that this particular landfall is the best alternative, or in our case, they claim that this is the only alternative, puts artificial pressure on decision makers, and our challenge is that the developers control all the data on site selection and design, and we don't have an engineering firm at our disposal to fully develop alternatives on our own. Our approach has been to take advantage of the one thing we know about Avangrid. They are loose with the facts. We consistently ask for a side-by-side, fully costed comparison of the alternatives considered, and we've used FOIA for any developer documents subject to disclosure that we think might be helpful. In doing this, we've been able to identify technically and commercially viable alternatives that were identified by Avangrid's own work, but never disclosed to challenge their claim and to weaken their credibility, which is a handy segue into my next slide, winning the credibility tug of war. I've broken this slide into two basic categories: defending our credibility and challenging theirs. Defending our credibility is all about the actions and positions we take to defend what we're saying, while challenging their credibility is basically doing the opposite, taking the actions and the positions needed to surface issues with what they've been saying. To the defensive actions, as we noted on the earlier slide, the two most common accusations that are leveled at our efforts are claims of NIMBY and the accusation we are spreading misinformation. We've taken a proactive approach to NIMBY by noting first that it is an accusation leveled in an effort to shame communities into silence, and that it is an unfair characterization of community concern. Look, whenever a major project like this is proposed, there's a developer that wants to make it happen, and they put forward the most glowing message they can to sell the idea. On the other hand, there are, more often than not, communities directly impacted, and they are going to be the most motivated to ask the hard questions and raise the legitimate concerns that need to be addressed. It is a healthy and necessary part of the review process. It's vital that citizens work in partnership with city officials and bring objective input to the process. And we share this in every meeting and with every community group that we're in front of. Don't back away from the NIMBY argument. To defend against Avangrid's claim about spreading misinformation, we are both proactive and reactive. We go out of our way to remain factual and objective. We provide citations of independent sourcing for all the information we present. On the reactive side, we don't take kindly to anyone challenging our integrity, so we immediately and directly address any such challenge. We stand by our work and our word. You can disagree with our issues, you can not care about our issues, but no one gets to challenge our integrity because you are unable to address our issues. On the offensive side of things, we focus on three areas. First, we highlight Avangrid's poor community engagement and reputation. This is a weakness they have, and it resonates with city leaders in Virginia Beach who pride themselves on citizen engagement. We offer examples of their failure to follow the most basic elements of good outreach, and we contrast it with examples of successful engagement that the city leaders recognize. We also share stories we hear from other communities that have faced similar issues like your own, and this speaks to the type of partner that we're dealing with. We also fact check every public claim they make. In our experience with this company, this is another weak area for them. As I mentioned earlier, they are kind of fast and loose with their claims. We spend a lot of time reviewing the tapes on public meetings, time-stamping claims, and then correcting those claims with citations. Interestingly enough, the refuting citation would often come from Avangrid's own public filings or prior presentations. This wearing away of their credibility, especially on statements publicly made before the council, was sort of a death by a thousand cuts approach, but it does erode local confidence over time. Lastly, these third-party developers are not really committed to their projects long-term. They can and often do sell out when they need liquidity or the margins are not what they expected. This is a message that we shared in the background in the early days, and then late last year we found out that Avangrid is actually planning to sell a portion of their Kitty Hawk lease area, a point that had not been disclosed to the city. We filed our research on this with the city in November, and later that month they stated their non-support for Avangrid. So with the close of 2023, we have the support of our city and have now shifted our fight to the state level where Avangrid, as I mentioned earlier, is trying to work around the city's decision. So our fight's not over, but we have made great progress, and it does give us confidence that we can win other fights along the way. So let me just offer a few closing thoughts. First off, don't listen to it's a done deal and it's not a fair process. It's not a done deal until the last coat of paint dries, and if you start assuming that it's not a fair process, I guess for me, I just lose heart. I have to assume that the rational argument and the community engagement wins in the end. It does take a complementary core team, a unified community, and a broad network. I'm blessed with balanced skill sets on our core team. Our group really complements each other well in that regard, and we respect each other's strengths and weaknesses. I'd also say a community speaking with one voice, and that's not necessarily the same message or the same way of saying it. It's just unified behind, we don't want this. Along with physical presence, there's just no substitute for that volume, that strong voice. But we also need to build robust networks at the local and state level. And I never cease to be amazed at who knows whose brother who happens to have a contact at the State House that we really need to get in touch with. And the more we've done that, the more robust our network has become, the more easily we can get access we need, and the more quickly we can ramp up response when it's needed. These are large, complex, and fast-moving issues, and I think that all the presentations today were an attestation to that. What we try to do is find our issue and stay focused on it. We're not trying to fight every aspect of offshore wind. We have found our piece of it, and we're making that our fight, and we're fighting that hard and consistently every day. So my guidance would be find your niche and be really good at it. No one person, I'm a big believer in this, no one person has all the answers, but I'm always faithful that the best answers are in the room. And effective teams really have a knack for listening and finding those best answers when they get together. And then lastly, these are long-term fights. We've done a lot to try and find ways to keep ourselves energized. If someone needs a couple of weeks to just take a break and go play with the grandkids, we do that. We support each other in that way. We have found ways to celebrate little victories along the way to keep it as positive as we can. But all the while thinking we never turn our back on the problem, even when we think it's under control. It's a lot like a fire in that. We were always instructed, don't turn your back on a fire, even when it's extinguished. You never know when it's going to flame back up. With that, I do want to thank again Susan Conley and the group there for the opportunity to share. If you're interested in finding out more about the issues that we're dealing with, you can go to our website noted here, or Suzanne and the team there have all of our contact information. We're happy to discuss any aspect of the project and what we're doing down here with anyone that's interested. And with that, Suzanne, I will turn it back over to you.
Is it all set? Okay, Joe, that was absolutely fabulous. We can't see you, unfortunately. You're a good-looking guy, so I'll just let everybody know that. And as far as what you just said, take that, Mr. Crackpot. That's all I have to say. So, listen, it's been a long, long afternoon, and those of you who've stayed for the whole thing, I can't thank you enough. Thank you so much for coming. We will continue this fight till there is no fight to fight. And thank you again. Thanks all the speakers. Thank you.